Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing at the edge of a river town that still clings to the last blue shadows before dawn. Your boots damp with mist and your fingers stiff from the kind of cold that settles deep into the joints and refuses to leave quickly. The air smells faintly of wet wood, horse breath, and the lingering smoke of last night's hearth fires drifting lazily beneath low-hanging roofs. Somewhere nearby, unseen in the haze, a bell tolls once slow, deliberate as if even time itself is reluctant to begin moving. Your pack waits at your feet, heavier than you remember packing it, full of folded cloth, small trinkets, and a few items that you're not entirely sure anyone will buy, though you carry them anyway because that is what a travelling merchant does hope, bundled in rough canvas and tied tight with fraying cord. You adjust the strap across your shoulder, already aware that it will chafe before long. Medieval travel brochures, if such a thing existed, would surely have neglected to mention that part. The river beside you moves quietly, its surface broken by thin ribbons of mist that curl and shift like something half alive. A narrow wooden bridge creaks as a lone cart crosses ahead, the driver hunched beneath a wool cloak, his breath visible in short bursts. You hesitate a moment, listening, feeling the weight of the road stretching out beyond the far bank. It is a long road, longer than you quite allowed yourself to imagine. You probably would not last a week out here, if we're being honest. The cold alone would see to that, not to mention the mud, the hunger, the endless walking. But for now, you are here, and the road does not care how long you last. It only waits. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like it, go ahead and leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is there. It's always a strange comfort to know who else is awake or drifting off on their own quiet journeys. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the bridge. The wood groans softly beneath your weight, damp with dew, and the river's slow murmur rises up through the gaps between the planks. On the far side, the road begins almost immediately, no grand marker, no ceremony, just a worn track of mud and ruts leading away between low hedges and scattered trees. Behind you, the town is already fading into the mist, its crooked roofs and narrow lanes dissolving into pale shapes. A dog barks once, then again, and then falls silent. No one calls you back, no one notices you leaving. That, more than anything, makes it feel real. You pull your cloak tighter, the rough wool scratching faintly at your neck, and begin to walk. At first, the rhythm feels awkward. Your pack shifts slightly with each step, the straps creaking in quiet protest. The road is uneven, scattered with stones and shallow puddles that reflect the faint light of the waking sky. You quickly learn to watch your footing, not out of caution so much as necessity. A twisted ankle out here would not be an inconvenience. It would be the end of the journey. As you walk, the world slowly stirs. A distant rooster announces itself with great confidence, though no one seems particularly impressed. Smoke begins to rise from a farmhouse chimney to your left, thin and pale against the grey sky. You catch the smell of something cooking, perhaps coarse bread or a simple pottage, and your stomach reminds you that it would very much like to be included in such arrangements. You consider stopping, just for a moment, just to warm your hands, perhaps exchange a few words. But merchants learn quickly that the road rewards momentum. Every pause becomes a longer pause. Every delay pushes you closer to nightfall without shelter, so you keep walking. The hedges along the road are thick and tangled, dotted with the last stubborn leaves of the season. In places, scraps of cloth and small wooden tokens hang from the branches, offerings left by travellers. No one can quite agree whether they are meant to bring good fortune or ward off misfortune, though some swear that leaving nothing at all is the surest way to invite trouble. You slow slightly, eyeing a small charm tied with faded red thread. It looks simple enough, just a carved piece of wood, worn smooth by time, but there is something about it that feels deliberate, placed with care. You reach into your pouch and find a small copper coin. It is not much, but then, neither are most offerings on this road. After a brief hesitation, you tie it loosely to a nearby branch. The metal clinks softly against the wood. There, just in case. The sky lightens gradually, shifting from deep grey to a pale, washed-out blue. The mist begins to lift, revealing more of the land around you, low fields bordered by rough stone walls, patches of frost clinging stubbornly to the ground in shaded places. Your breath comes steady now, your body settling into the slow, persistent rhythm of walking. Step, shift, breathe, step, shift, breathe. It is not unpleasant, exactly, just endless. A little further on, you pass a pair of peasants already at work in the fields, their movements slow and deliberate, as if conserving energy for the long day ahead. They glance up as you approach, their expressions unreadable. Travellers are common enough, but never entirely trusted. You nod politely. One of them nods back. The other returns to digging, unimpressed. You walk on. By mid-morning, the sun has risen enough to cast a faint warmth across the road, though it does little to chase away the damp. Your boots are already marked with drying mud, the edges cracking slightly where the leather bends. You make a mental note to oil them at the next opportunity. Neglecting such things is how a journey quietly falls apart. A faint sound reaches you then, hoofbeats. You step aside instinctively, moving toward the edge of the road as a small group approaches a mounted man in a worn cloak, followed by 2 pack mules laden with goods. Another merchant, perhaps, though better supplied, or simply more fortunate. As they pass, the rider gives you a brief glance, his eyes sharp and assessing. You wonder what he sees a fellow traveller, or just another obstacle to avoid. Road's heavy past the bend, he mutters, almost as an afterthought. You nod your thanks, though he is already moving on. The sound of hooves fading into the distance. Heavy road. You sigh quietly and continue. Sure enough, not long after, the ground begins to soften underfoot. The ruts deepen, filled with dark, sticky mud that clings stubbornly to your boots. Each step becomes a small negotiation lift, pull, place, hope. You cannot help but let out a quiet breath of amusement. Of course the road is heavy. It is always heavy. That is, in many ways, its defining feature. Still, you press on, because that is what a travelling merchant does. You walk and you carry, and you hope that somewhere ahead, beyond the next bend, beyond the next hill, there will be a place where your goods are wanted. Your coin is enough, and your bones can rest, if only for a night. And so, with the river long behind you and the town already fading into memory, you continue along the muddy road, your steps steady, your breath even, and the long journey only just beginning. The road carries you onward through the slow brightening of morning, and before long the land begins to gather itself into signs of greater order. The hedges grow neater, the ruts deepen from frequent use. A ditch appears along one side, then a low timber fence, then a scatter of cottages with smoke rising from them in thin, stubborn threads. Somewhere ahead, beyond the curve of the road, and a stand of bare-limbed trees. You hear the dull clank of iron and the brief murmur of voices. A town lies there, not large, but walled, and very much awake to the business of making arrival slightly more expensive than departure. Your shoulders are already sore from the pack. The strap has found the tenderest possible place along your collarbone and decided to live there. You shift it, which helps for perhaps 3 breaths. The dog that barked back by the river town has not followed you, though for a while you half expected to find it trotting behind with the superior expression dogs reserve for human foolishness. Instead, you have only your own company, your goods, and the faint metallic taste of anticipation that comes whenever stone walls rise ahead. The town gate comes into view all at once. It is built of heavy oak banded with iron, set into a wall of worn stone mottled with moss, soot, and the stains of many wet seasons. Above it hangs a narrow wooden platform where a sleepy guard leans on a spear and looks as though he has personally taken offence at the existence of dawn. Beneath the archway, carts line up in no particular order, which is to say in the most irritating order possible. A farmer with sacks of onions, a woman leading 2 geese and a child with red ears, a pair of monks on foot, their hems muddy but their expressions serene in a way that seems almost professionally maintained, and, just ahead of you, a cooper guiding a handcart stacked with small barrels that smell faintly of vinegar. You slow and join the line. This is one of the first real lessons of the Merchant's Road. You do not simply arrive. You present yourself. You wait. You're stared at by people who assume, often correctly, that you're carrying something worth charging for. The gatehouse itself is squat and practical, with slit windows and a roof of dark shingles that glisten from last night's damp. On either side of the arch, small niches hold weathered saints' images blackened by smoke and age. Someone has tucked a sprig of rosemary beneath one of them, perhaps as devotion, perhaps as protection, perhaps because rosemary is expected to fix everything from bad air to bad luck, to a suspicious swelling of the gums. Medieval remedies are ambitious that way. If a leaf, root, or prayer exists, someone somewhere will insist it can help your feet. The line inches forward. You can smell everything now: wet wool, mule sweat, damp wood, onions, old leather, and the warm yeast scent of bread from within the walls. It drifts out through the gate in a way that feels almost taunting. Somewhere inside, a bell rings lighter and quicker than the one you heard by the river before dawn. A church bell, perhaps, calling the hour or a prayer. In these places, bells do more than mark time. They organize it, bless it, interrupt it, and occasionally make it feel as though the whole day belongs to someone else. The guard above shifts. A second man emerges beneath the arch, and this one is clearly more important, which you can tell because he looks even less pleased to be here. He wears a wool tunic under a short cloak fastened with a plain brooch, and at his belt hangs an iron key large enough to suggest both authority and a love of jangling symbolism. In one hand he carries a tally board, in the other a stylus. His beard is trimmed with the severe neatness of a man who distrusts merriment. He calls the next traveller forward. The farmer with the onions goes first. There is a brief exchange, some counting, a little sighing performed as though it were a sacred ritual, and then a few coins change hands. The farmer mutters something under his breath on the way through that is probably not a blessing. Then the woman with the geese, then the cooper, then one of the monks speaks to the tollman with such calm courtesy that the man almost seems embarrassed to ask for anything at all. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether monks truly pay less at town gates, or whether they simply have the unnerving ability to make other people feel spiritually untidy. Now it is your turn. You step beneath the arch, and the air changes at once. It is cooler there, smelling of stone, old damp, and the faint ammoniac trace of horses that have passed through too often for too many years. The shadow of the gatehouse falls over you like a cloak. The tollman glances first at your face, then at your pack, and then, with the swift instinct of his profession, at your boots. Mud tells stories. So do boots. Yours say that you've come a fair distance already and are likely foolish enough to continue. Name, he asks. You give it. Trade cloth, you say, which is true enough, though not the whole truth. Small goods. He eyes the bundle at your side. What sort of small goods? The sort people buy when they have coin. He looks up then, and for one brief moment you fear you have overplayed your hand. But the corner of his mouth twitches very slightly, either with amusement or the early stages of a grimace. Hard to tell. He begins his questions. Where from? Where bound? Whether you intend to sell within the walls? Whether you carry blades longer than the law permits? Whether any of your goods are subject to guild privilege, market license, or prior claim? Medieval commerce, you discover again, is less a free flow of enterprise and more a hedge maze designed by suspicious men with keys. You answer carefully. The truth, on the road, is useful, but precision is survival. You say enough to seem honest and not enough to inspire innovation in the toll schedule. He scratches marks onto the board, behind you. Another traveller coughs theatrically, the universal sign for I too am important and hate waiting. At last the man names the fee. It is, naturally, too much. Not ruinous, not outrageous enough to start an argument you cannot win, just exactly high enough to make you feel that the wall itself has reached into your purse with a practiced hand. You draw out the coins. The metal is cold against your palm. As he counts them, you notice the little notches carved into the gatepost nearby. Dozens or perhaps hundreds of them, some fresh, some worn nearly flat. Tallies, maybe, or idle knife marks from guards with long hours and poor conversation. Some swear that such cuts keep away ill fortune from travellers entering under the arch. Others say they are made for debtors, or thieves, or no reason at all beyond boredom, even now. It is hard to tell whether every custom has meaning, or whether people simply cannot bear an empty piece of wood. The tollman nods you through. You pass under the inner half of the arch and emerge into the town proper, and for a moment the change feels dramatic enough to be mistaken for magic. The street beyond is narrow, paved in places with stones slick from use and damp weather, though plenty of mud has still managed to establish itself in the gaps. Buildings lean inward on either side as if eavesdropping. Upper stories jut over the lane, their timber frames dark against pale plaster. A woman shakes a cloth from an upstairs window. Somewhere close by, a smith's hammer strikes metal in a patient rhythm. A baker's boy slips past carrying a tray covered with linen, and the smell that rises from it nearly convinces you to follow him like a pilgrim after a relic. You stop just inside the gate, partly to gather yourself, partly because everyone else is moving with the confidence of people who know where the street bends and where the puddles lie. You, by contrast, stand like a man recently admitted to a feast only to discover he must also understand the seating plan. A pair of boys hurry by with baskets of eels, one whispering something to the other as they glance at you. Not hostile, merely curious. Travellers bring stories, and sometimes lice, and now and then a ribbon or knife worth staring at. You move aside toward the wall and let the town reveal itself. To your right, The gatehouse yard opens into a holding space for carts and animals. A mule stamps impatiently beside a wagon loaded with wool bales covered in tarred cloth. Nearby, a clerk sits at a small table beneath an awning, recording something into a parchment roll with the grim dedication of a man determined to make ink everyone's problem. His fingers are stained dark, and a beeswax candle stub sits ready beside him, even though it is daytime, because records, like sin, do not wait for better light. Ahead, the street slopes gently upward toward a central square you cannot yet see, though the noise of it carries easily vendors calling, a dog barking, a child crying, the clatter of pails, the cheerful argument of hens. The sound is lively, but not hurried. This is not the roar of some grand city. It is the hum of a place that knows its own scale and intends to keep it. You begin to walk. At once you feel the cost of the toll more keenly. Not only the missing coins, but what they represent the price of access. The right to stand where trade happens, the privilege of being squeezed politely by men whose livelihoods depend on your hope. Every road, every bridge, every gate seems to have learned the same trick. A merchant sets out carrying goods, and by the time he arrives anywhere, half the world has decided it deserves a share simply for existing between him and his customer. Still, here you are, and if the road lightens your purse, the town may yet refill it. You pass a chapel set into the line of houses, its little oak door standing open. A woman inside lights a candle before a painted saint whose face has cracked with age. Wax glows gold for a moment, then settles. Beside the door hangs a cluster of pilgrim badges pinned to a strip of cloth, tiny stamped shapes of shells, keys, hands, swords. Some travellers buy them for devotion, others for protection. A few, it is whispered, wear them because innkeepers sometimes trust a badge more than a face. Faith and practical advantages have always travelled well together. The farther you go from the gate, the easier your steps become. You're no longer only a man arriving. You're once again a merchant in motion, measuring faces, noting shops, listening for accents that suggest who buys what and at what price. A butcher's apprentice hauls a bucket of water across the lane. Two women argue over the cost of salt fish. A tanner's yard announces itself long before you see it, mostly through smell, which arrives like an insult and lingers like a curse. You smile despite yourself. This is the work, not the grand exchange of silver on fine tables, but this slower business of passing through places built from tolls, soot, bread, bells, and suspicion. Your feet ache, your shoulder burns, your purse is lighter, and yet the day has properly begun only now, within these walls, under the eyes of strangers who might become customers if God is willing, and your prices look humble enough. Behind you, the great oak gate creaks shut for a moment to manage some quarrel in the road outside, and the sound rolls through the street like a final word. You are in. You do not stay long within the walls. A merchant who lingers too near a gate risks spending his best morning among guards, clerks, and the sort of carts that smell powerfully of onions, which is no way to preserve a sense of purpose. So after a little bread bought from a stall near the square, a coarse round loaf still warm in the middle, torn apart with cold fingers and eaten while standing, you find the far side of the town. Pay no further coin, thanks be to every merciful saint, and step once more into open country. The road beyond is wider than the one you left before dawn, though no less muddy for the privilege. It bends between low fields and scattered hawthorns, then stretches ahead in a pale brown ribbon worn deep by hooves, boots, wheels, and weather. This is a pilgrim road, you can tell almost at once. not because it is better kept nothing so luxurious, but because it carries a particular kind of movement. People here walk not only to arrive, but to mean something by it. You fall in among them gradually, as one stream joins another. A woman in a faded blue cloak walks with a hazel staff polished smooth by her hand. A broad-shouldered man with a patched hood carries a leather satchel covered in little stitched symbols meant, perhaps, to ward off illness. 2 boys drive a donkey burdened with sacks of grain. A thin priest on foot mutters to himself, though whether in prayer or simple annoyance is not clear. A peddler with tin brooches pinned inside his cloak keeps glancing at everyone like a crow judging bright objects. You know the type immediately. That is not an insult, it is professional recognition. The morning air has lost some of its bite, though damp still clings close to the ground. Water gleams in the furrows beside the road. Rooks move over the fields in untidy black groups, dropping now and then to peck at something unseen. Your boots make the same sound with every few steps, a soft pull, a wet lift, a resigned return. This road has opinions about your pace and feels no need to hide them. Before long you pass the first shrine. It stands where the road forks briefly around a mound of tangled roots and stones, no larger than a cupboard set upright, built of timber with a tiny peaked roof. Inside, behind an iron grate, rests a painted figure of a saint whose face is half obscured by smoke-darkened varnish and old candle soot. Someone has laid winter berries at the base. Someone else has hung a strip of cloth there, green once, now browned by rain. Beeswax drips in pale folds from the ledge where candles have burned down and been replaced and burned down again. Travellers slow as they pass. Some cross themselves. Some bow their heads. One man taps the shrine twice with his knuckles and then touches his chest. A woman presses 2 fingers to the grate and whispers something too soft to hear. No one can quite agree whether these roadside shrines protect the road or merely remind you how much protection you need. Some swear that missing the gesture at a shrine invites bad weather by noon. Others insist it is limping, not rain, that follows such negligence. The road, of course, declines to clarify. You're not especially superstitious, at least not in the comfortable way people claim not to be superstitious while carefully avoiding every possible omen. Still, when your turn comes to pass the shrine, you incline your head and murmur a small courtesy to the saint, whoever he may be under the soot and fading paint. It costs you nothing, or almost nothing. Reverence always takes at least a little time. The woman with the hazel staff glances toward you and gives a faint nod, as if approving your manners, up close. She is older than you first thought, the skin at her eyes lined by weather and years of squinting into poor roads. A small pewter badge is pinned to her cloak near the shoulder, stamped in the shape of a shell. You go toward the Abbey Road, she asks. I go where buyers are likely to be, you say. That is a holier answer than most merchants give. You cannot help smiling. Then I must be ill. She huffs a laugh through her nose, which in this company counts as warm approval. Together you walk a little while, not as friends exactly, but as fellow sufferers beneath the same sky. She tells you she's been to a shrine farther south, where the spring water is said to cure weakness in the legs, though those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the healing comes from the water, the saint, or the long walk required to get there. You suspect the spring has benefited greatly from the sort of accounting that favours miracles over rest. Still, she speaks with calm certainty, and you have seen stranger things believed with less evidence. In return, you tell her which town ahead charges less for market space on feast weeks, and that information pleases her far more than any legend. The road rises gently after that, enough to let you look back across the fields. The walled town you left now appears small and grey in the distance, its gate and roof softened by haze. Smoke lifts above it in thin, wavering threads. Ahead, the world opens wider. Patches of woodland break the fields. Here and there stand winter storehouses on raised stones to keep out damp and rats, their timber sides darkened with age. You pass one farmyard where eels hang smoking beneath a lean-to roof, and another where washed wool lies under rough cloth covers, waiting for better weather. Medieval life does not so much defeat damp as negotiate with it. Around midday the road grows busier. A group of pilgrims comes toward you from the other direction, their cloaks marked with badges and little sewn crosses, their hems crusted with dried mud from many days' walking. One carries a bundle wrapped so carefully it must either be very precious or entirely worthless in a sacred way. Another has tied tiny bells to his satchel, and they chime softly with each step. You move aside for them where the track narrows, and everyone performs the delicate dance of passing without quite entering the ditch. God keep you, says one, and your feet, says another, which feels more practical. A young boy among them stares openly at your pack. What do you sell? Whatever seems useful to people who have already bought all the essentials. He considers this with grave seriousness. So, ribbons, and needles, combs, pins, little knives, bits of cloth, and the occasional answer. His eyes narrow. You sell answers, only poor ones. This appears to satisfy him, and the pilgrims move on, bells fading, staffs tapping, their pace slow but steady. There is something oddly soothing in watching them go, all of them bent toward a destination that promises holiness, healing, forgiveness, or simply a reason to keep walking. Merchants and pilgrims are not so different. Perhaps both trust the road more than common sense would recommend. By afternoon, clouds gather low and pale, and the colour drains gently from the day. The fields on either side of the track shift from green-brown to silver-brown under the dim light. A breeze rises and carries the smell of damp earth, sheep, and distant wood smoke. You pull your cloak tighter and reach for the heel of your loaf, breaking off a piece to eat while walking. There is an art to eating on the road without surrendering the food to mud, birds, or your own distraction. You have not mastered it, but you aspire to competence. A chunk of bread, a bit of hard cheese, a swallow from your flask if you still have any thin ale left that is enough to keep a man moving, though it rarely persuades him he is living richly. The woman with the hazel staff has fallen behind somewhere, perhaps to rest at another shrine or speak with travellers you did not notice. In her place comes a younger man driving a small mule loaded with baskets covered in cloth. He wears a pilgrim badge at his collar and carries incongruously a rabbit's foot tied by a string to his belt. You glance at it. He catches the look, for luck, and the badge for better luck. You nod solemnly, a layered defence. He grins, relieved perhaps that you're not about to mock him. My mother says saints are stronger, but the rabbit was quicker. That is how the road is belief stacked upon belief, charms tied beside relics, prayers spoken over herbs, iron nailed above doors, little bones sewn into hems, verses recited before bridges, salt thrown in fire, saints invoked for teeth, joints, childbirth, pigs, storms, and lost spoons. Even now, it's hard to tell whether people truly believe every remedy or simply prefer not to insult any force that might be listening. You come at last to a larger shrine where three roads meet. This one is stone-built and old, with carvings worn nearly flat by rain. A little basin sits beneath it to catch runoff from the roof, and travellers use that water to wet their fingers, smooth their brows, or dab at tired eyes. Nearby stands a crooked ash tree from whose branches hang ribbons, old wreaths, and tiny carved tokens of wax and wood. A few have rotted through and fallen to the roots, where they lie among wet leaves like forgotten promises. You stop there to rest, only for a little while. A merchant cannot afford to let afternoon become evening while his back's against a roadside stone, however invitingly the stone presents itself. Still, your shoulders ache, and your left foot has developed a complaint sharp enough to deserve attention. You sit on a low bank, unlace the boot, and inspect the damage. Nothing dramatic, just a hot spot on the heel where the leather has rubbed, the sort of small injury that becomes memorable through persistence. You rub it with a bit of goose fat kept for the purpose, then retie the boot with the care of a man performing surgery on his own future. Nearby, an old fellow with a beard like unravelled wool mutters that dock leaves tucked into stockings prevent blisters. Some swear by onion skins, others by nettle ash, if applied with a prayer to a saint whose name he pronounces too quickly to catch. You thank him and decide, for now, to remain loyal to goose fat and caution. There are only so many experiments one should conduct inside one's footwear. When you stand again, the world feels a little steadier. The day has gone quieter, fewer travellers now. The road stretches ahead between hedges and low bare trees, and somewhere far off you hear bells faint, layered, almost carried more by memory than by air. Perhaps an abbey, perhaps a village chapel, perhaps just the road teaching you that everything worth reaching rings before you can see it. You shift your pack, settle your shoulders, and walk on between the shrines, the fields, and the long pale ruts of the pilgrim track. One more figure in the slow procession of people who trust muddy roads for reasons they cannot fully explain. By late afternoon, the sky lowers. It does not darken all at once, nor with any theatrical flourish. It simply seems to sink, little by little, until the whole world feels roofed in wet wool. The colour of the fields fades to dull brown and grey. The hedges grow black at their roots, and the road ahead loses what little cheer it had been pretending to possess. You walk beneath this sagging heaven with your cloak drawn close and your chin tucked down, listening to the first fine taps of rain on the hood and shoulders of the people ahead of you. At first, no one admits what is happening. A few drops are merely weather thinking aloud. A scattered patter is something one can outwalk, but then the air thickens, and the rain becomes steady enough to turn every surface slick and every opinion sour. The pilgrim road begins to shine. Cart ruts darken, fill, and blur at the edges. Water gathers in the hoofprints left earlier in the day. Even the saints in their roadside shrines look, from a distance, as though they might prefer to be indoors. You are nearing a manor boundary when the full inconvenience of it begins. The signs are plain enough. A stone marker half sunk in the verge. A strip of coppiced woodland to the right. Beyond that, a broad field sloping gently toward a cluster of timber barns and the dark roof line of a manor house in the distance. The house itself sits back from the road behind a low embankment and a line of bare trees, not grand enough to be called a castle, but substantial enough to make its point, a place of storehouses, rent, grain, duty, and stern-faced accounts. The sort of household that knows exactly how many hens belong to whom and would gladly explain it at length. The road narrows where it crosses a shallow stream by way of a timbered causeway, and there the trouble gathers. Two carts have met at the crossing and neither can easily yield. One comes from the manor side, heavy with sacks covered by damp cloth. The other, approaching from your direction, carries barrels lashed under rope netting and drawn by an ox that has decided with admirable conviction that movement is no longer a compelling idea. Men stand in the rain waving their arms and talking over one another in tones that suggest each believes the weather itself is a personal insult arranged by the other party. You slow, because everyone slows. Rain on a road creates its own kind of fellowship, unwilling, muddy, and very attentive to who must step where. The ditch to one side is already running with brown water. The bank on the other has dissolved into a slippery slope of trampled grass. There is no graceful way around, so you come to a halt among a little knot of delayed travellers and accept, with the resignation proper to the age, that the road has chosen waiting. A man beside you snorts into his beard, always the crossing. He wears a short wool cloak dark with rain, and carries a wicker basket under oilcloth. His nose is pink with cold. In summer, he adds, it is dust. In winter, mud. In spring, more mud with ambition. That seems a complete set, you say. He glances at you, decides you're worth a small grim smile, and shifts his basket to the other arm. You new to this stretch, knew enough to be disappointed. That means yes. Ahead, one of the carters is arguing with a manor reeve or steward, some local official with a hood, a staff, and the unmistakable confidence of a man standing nearest to authority. He has planted himself at the edge of the crossing like a saint of obstruction. Rain beads on his sleeves. His boots, unlike everyone else's, appear recently greased. This only deepens the general resentment. The matter, as far as you can piece together, is not merely whose cart passes first. That would be too simple. It is also a question of customary right, of who owes precedence on manor land, of whether the barrels are bound for market under prior licence, of whether the sacks from the manor granary are on lord's business, of whether the ox can be persuaded to move before old age claims it entirely, and of whether all present have the moral strength not to push one another into the stream. Local custom, you learn, is often just another name for yesterday's argument pretending to be law. The rain strengthens. It runs from your hood in a slow, cold line down the back of your neck. Your boots sink more deeply each moment. A horse somewhere behind stamps and tosses its head. The smell of wet wool thickens around the waiting group, joined now by damp leather, muddy straw, and the faint sourness of a cartload of turnips that has seen better handling. A woman under a patch cloak edges closer to the bank and opens a cloth bundle, revealing a heel of bread and a little onion. She offers you a piece of the bread with the practical generosity travellers sometimes discover only when equally inconvenienced. You accept with thanks. It is coarse, slightly stale, and exactly what the moment requires. There's no hurrying them, she says, nodding toward the quarrel at the crossing. Manor men love a rule best when it delays someone else. You speak from experience. I married experience, she says, and bites into the onion with such calm determination that you immediately believe her. Around you, waiting settles into its own routine. A boy sent ahead with 2 geese crouches under the lee of a cartwheel, and talks to the birds as though they might offer legal guidance. A thin priest draws his cloak over a satchel and mutters a prayer against storms, though whether for safety or impatience is hard to tell. A pair of labourers lift their hems and step gingerly toward the ditch to wash mud from their hands, only to discover that the ditch is now mostly mud itself, but more liquid and therefore, in some perverse medieval way, considered an improvement. No one can quite agree whether it is worse to be delayed hungry or delayed wet. You are currently conducting private research on being both. The steward at the crossing at last raises a hand for silence. This takes some time to achieve because the carters are committed men, not to principle exactly, but to volume. When quiet does come, he announces that the manor sacks pass first, being grain due inward before nightfall, and the barrels must wait until the ox cart can back clear enough to let the road breathe again. This pleases almost no one. Still, custom has spoken, or at least a man with a staff has impersonated it convincingly enough. The manor cart creaks forward, wheels sink, strain, and climb over the wet timbers of the crossing with a groan of wood and harness. The ox on the other side regards all this with the deadened patience of a creature that has seen too much human planning. While the carts are shifted inch by inch, you look toward the manor itself. Its windows are narrow and dark against the rain. Smoke rises from the main hall chimney in a thicker plume than anywhere else nearby. Through the trees you glimpse outbuildings, a gate, perhaps a little dovecote. There will be rushes on the hall floor there, damp boots by the entrance, servants carrying trenchers of coarse bread and bowls of pottage from kitchen to table. Somewhere under that roof, someone dry and well fed is likely discussing stores for winter smoked fish, grain, ale casks, sacks of beans, sides of bacon salted against want. The thought is not exactly comforting, but it is vivid. Beside you, the pink-nosed man points with his chin toward a small post set near the road, almost lost in the rain. From it hangs a little bunch of herbs bound with red thread. For ague, he says. Does it work? He shrugs. Some swear that herbs tied at boundary places keep fever from crossing with travellers. Others say it keeps elves out of cattle. I've never had fever in this ditch, so draw your own conclusion. You stare at the herbs, wet thyme, maybe, or yarrow, with something darker beneath. Medieval certainty is a patchwork thing. Leechcraft, charms, saints, smoke, vinegar, muttered verses, bundles over doors. Few people trust one remedy alone when the world is clearly inventing new inconveniences every week. At last the first cart clears. The ox cart begins, reluctantly, to reverse. This requires 6 men, 2 shouted instructions that directly contradict one another, and one very expressive snort from the ox. Mud sucks at the wheels. A barrel slips half an inch and is caught by a strap. Someone curses in a manner that would certainly not impress the nearby priest, though it does impress the geese, who answer at once. The rain eases slightly, as if bored by its own success. You shift your weight from one aching foot to the other and glance down the line of waiting travellers. Faces have softened a little now that progress exists, however slowly. Shared delay has sanded down the sharper edges. The woman with the onion has produced salt from somewhere unimaginable. The priest accepts it gravely on a crust of bread. A young man offers to hold an old fellow's bundle while he reties his shoe. The boy with the geese has given them names based on the carters and appears deeply pleased with himself. When your turn finally comes to cross, the steward barely looks at you. That is a blessing. Invisible travellers pay less in argument. You pick your way over the wet timbers, feeling the stream rush darkly beneath. The wood is slick, the railing little more than a suggestion. On the far side the road climbs slightly, and you pause once to look back. The manor boundary marker stands in the rain, patient as a tooth. Behind it, travellers still wait, though fewer now. The whole scene already has the quality of a tale that will be retold tonight in 3 versions. None of them entirely true. Some will say the steward delayed everyone out of pride. Some will say the ox refused to move because of a witch mark cut in the crossing post. Some swear that when rain begins at a manor boundary, someone on the estate has broken faith with a saint's day. Even now, It is hard to tell whether roads gather legends because they are old, or simply because waiting demands entertainment. You walk on. Your cloak is soaked at the hem. Your left heel reminds you of its existence with each step. But the crossing is behind you now, and ahead the road bends toward a stand of trees where smoke rises from somewhere hidden. Perhaps cottages, perhaps a mill, perhaps the promise of shelter if the light lasts. The rain dwindles to a mist. Water drips from hedge and branch. Somewhere a bell rings faintly through the damp air, carrying across the fields with that oddly holy confidence bells always possess. You listen to it while the road resumes its long, patient conversation beneath your boots. Movement again after waiting. That is the true relief. And so you go on through the wet evening, leaving the quarrel of the crossing, the rules of the manor, and the smell of rain-soaked grain behind you, carrying forward only your pack, your hunger, and the quiet hope that before night fully closes, a fire and a roof may yet be persuaded to receive you. By the time the first real lamps begin to show themselves through the wet dark, you are ready to forgive almost any building for existing. The road has narrowed into a lane between dripping hedges and low stone walls, and the last of the rain hangs in the air as a fine, cold mist that settles on your lashes and gathers at the edge of your hood. Dusk has come softly but thoroughly. The fields have flattened into shadow. Trees stand as darker shapes against a sky the colour of old pewter. Somewhere water runs unseen beside the lane, and every so often your boot finds a patch of mud deep enough to remind you that the earth has no intention of ending the day in a generous mood. Then, ahead, a window glows. Not brightly. Nothing in this world glows brightly without either great expense or alarming implications. But it is enough a square of amber light wavering through oiled cloth or horn, then another beside it, and above them the low dark line of a roof. As you draw nearer, you make out the rest, a timbered alehouse crouched just back from the lane, its walls whitewashed once but long since weathered by smoke, rain, and the sort of hands that lean on door frames while discussing prices. A hanging board creaks above the entrance, painted with what may have been a stag or a badly informed goat. The rain has softened all certainty from it. What matters is simpler. There is a roof, there is light, there is almost certainly heat, and perhaps ale, and with luck a corner of bench not yet claimed by someone with a wet dog and a louder opinion than necessary. You cross the yard, where puddles reflect the doorway in broken gold. 2 carts stand under a lean-to at one side, their wheels chocked, their coverings beaded with water. A horse shifts in the dark and breathes steam into the evening. The smell here is promising wet straw, wood smoke, yeast, and something stewing with onions. Civilization, in its truest form, is often just hot food inside walls. You duck through the low door. At once the world changes. Warmth does not exactly embrace you. It collides with you. So does noise, after the hush of the road and the endless patient mutter of rain. The alehouse feels almost miraculous in its density. Smoke lies thick beneath the soot-black rafters. Firelight blinks on pottery, damp cloaks, rough tables, and faces turned red gold by heat and drink. Rushes are strewn across the stone floor, though they have long since surrendered any claim to freshness, and now hold a rich, complicated memory of spilled ale, old boots, ash, and things better left unspecified. A dog sleeps beneath a bench with the moral authority of an abbot. Someone laughs from the far end of the room. Someone else coughs into a sleeve. A pot lid rattles in the hearth. And, perhaps best of all, no one asks you to yield the road to a grain cart. You stand just inside for a moment, blinking the damp from your eyes. Water drips from your cloak onto the rushes. A serving girl passes with a wooden tray, sees you, and with one glance sorts you neatly into the category of road-worn, hungry, and probably solvent enough for a bowl of something hot. "Shut the door if you love mankind," says a voice from nearby. You shut it. This speaker is an old man by the hearth with a face lined like dry apple skin and hands spread toward the flames. "And if you do not love mankind," he adds, "shut it for the sake of the fire." This seems fair. You nod, and that is apparently enough to admit you to the temporary fellowship of the indoors. The room is not large, but it has been asked to contain more life than it was built for. There are merchants, by the look of them, and drovers, and two men whose matching cloaks suggest manor service or someone's household business. A pair of women sit near the wall, sharing a jug and a conversation so focused that neither glances up. At the far table, a young clerk with ink on 2 fingers is trying to keep a scrap of parchment dry while a broad man beside him explains something with both hands and all the confidence of a man who has never had to copy his own words. Near the hearth, boots steam gently. You ease your pack from your shoulders, and the relief is so immediate it nearly feels sinful. A bench opens near the middle of the room, and you take it before fate can reconsider. The wood is rough, a little sticky in patches, and therefore perfect. You lay your pack beside you with the instinctive care of anyone whose livelihood fits into straps and buckles. The serving girl returns before you can summon her. All she asks, "Yes, stew, if it can be chewed." She gives you a look that may be pity, may be amusement, then yes. She disappears toward the hearth, and you sit breathing in the room, wet wool drying, smoke from oak or ash, the sweeter note of beeswax candles guttering on a shelf near the counter, onion, cabbage, broth, and the thick malty breath of ale. Somewhere beneath it all, the old sharp scent of rushes. You can feel the day leaving your body inch by inch, not because the ache is gone, but because it has finally found a place to settle. A man drops onto the bench opposite you without ceremony. He's middle-aged, rain-creased, and broad through the shoulders, with a beard still damp at the tips. He has the tired alertness of someone who works the road often enough to trust nothing and enjoy heat whenever it appears. "You come from the manor crossing?" he asks. "I do." He rolls his eyes toward the rafters. "Then you've earned 2 ales. Will one do it? Never does. But people keep trying." He introduces himself as a wool factor bound 2 towns farther north, delayed by the same steward and apparently still emotionally involved in the matter. Within a few breaths you have the full account, including 3 improved details that almost certainly did not happen, and one that may have involved the ox showing more sense than the men. Alehouse truth is a travelling thing. It arrives tired and gets polished by the fire. Your ale comes first, dark and a little cloudy in a pottery cup with a chipped rim. It is not remarkable, but it is warm compared to the road, and that alone makes it feel medicinal. Medieval people have strong opinions about what counts as medicine, and to be fair, warm ale after rain has cured despair in more than one documented soul. Then comes the stew, thick in a wooden bowl, with cabbage, leeks, barley, and a few honourable scraps of meat that suggest a pig once brushed past the pot and made a contribution. Beside it sits a trencher of coarse bread hard enough on the outside to qualify briefly as defensive architecture. You tear into it with gratitude bordering on devotion. The wool factor watches you eat and nods approvingly. First bowl always disappears too quickly. "It wasn't a bowl," you say after a swallow. "It was a warning." He laughs once through his nose and drinks. Around you the room continues its slow churn of voices. A younger merchant nearby is laying out little wares on the bench between himself and a pair of sisters who have come in from some nearby holding ribbons, pins, bone combs, a clasp with a green glass bead. Even now trade creeps into rest. He speaks in a soft, patient tone, the tone of a man who knows that 2 pennies saved by the buyer will be celebrated like a military triumph. One sister fingers a strip of red ribbon and asks if it fades in rain. Only if the rain has money, he tells her, and that's good. You make a private note of it. At the hearth, the old man who objected to the door is now explaining to anyone willing to listen that laying a sprig of rowan above the stable latch keeps nightmares from troubling horses. A drover swears it is hawthorn, not rowan. A third man claims neither works unless tied with blue thread and blessed on the eve of St. Martin. No one can quite agree whether the saints enjoy this constant administrative burden, but everyone seems certain they remain very busy. The serving girl passes again, this time carrying a candle to replace one that has guttered low. She pinches the old flame, scrapes wax with her thumb, sets the fresh beeswax stub in place, and moves on. The new candle releases that faint sweet smell that always seems cleaner than tallow, as though wealth itself burns with better manners. At another table, someone has spread damp gloves near the fire and is being sharply corrected by the innkeeper. A heavy-set woman with arms like well-fed hams and the gaze of a commander defending sacred territory. Hearth space, like market space, obeys strict unspoken law. The innkeeper circles the room with the serene menace of one who knows exactly who has paid, who owes, and who is about to pretend confusion. When she reaches your bench, you give your coin promptly. Bed space, she asks, if available. She tilts her head. Floor by the loft ladder. Blanket extra. Will the floor object only if you snore worse than the cooper? The cooper, apparently present and unashamed, raises his cup from the next bench. The floor knows quality. You agree to the blanket. A floor by a ladder is luxury enough after the road. Besides, experience has taught you that private chamber in a place like this usually means a space just large enough to contain disappointment at a higher rate. You finish the stew slowly now, no longer attacking but inhabiting it. Heat returns to your fingers. Your boots steam faintly under the bench. The room settles as true night takes hold beyond the shutters. New arrivals grow fewer. Those already in place relax into the evening's shape. Someone near the back begins humming a tune too soft to become a song. Cups are refilled. Bread is broken. Damp cloaks are repositioned like tired animals. The wool factor tells you of a market 3 days ahead where smoked fish sells well during fast days if one arrives before local traders flood the square. In return, you mention a town where the toll clerk can be softened with courtesy and exact change, which in some circles counts as advanced scholarship. A clerk at the next table overhears and says exact change softens every clerk, which may be the truest thing spoken all evening. Then comes gossip, because no meal under a smoky roof is complete without it. A suspicious monk, it seems, passed through 2 nights ago with a reliquary he kept wrapped in wool and refused to show anyone. Some say it held a saint's finger, some say a splinter of the true cross, some swear it contained nothing holier than a chicken bone polished by confidence. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, except on one point the monk drank surprisingly well for a man burdened by sanctity. The innkeeper asked for her view, says only that relics which cannot endure lamplight are best left to their own conscience. You like her immediately. As the room dims and the fire sinks lower, weariness begins to overtake even conversation. Bodies lean, voices soften. One of the sisters buys the red ribbon after all. The dog under the bench rises, circles twice, and relocates with enormous seriousness. Above, in the loft, someone coughs and rolls in straw. The rain has stopped entirely now, though drops still fall from the eaves outside in a patient slow rhythm. At last you gather your things and make for the place the innkeeper promised, a patch of floor near the ladder, half screened by a barrel and a stack of kindling. It is not elegant, but it is indoors, and elegance has no meaningful place in your current theology. You spread your cloak beneath you, pay the extra coin for a wool blanket that smells faintly of lanolin and old smoke, and sit for a moment unlacing your boots. That is when the true luxury arrives. Not the ale, not the stew, not even the fire. It is the sensation of no longer moving. Your feet throb in honest complaint, your shoulders ache with the slow, deep ache of straps and miles, your left heel, having spent the day composing a grievance, now submits it in full. You rub it, pull dry cloth around it as best you can, and set the boots beside your head where no one is likely to mistake them for community property. Around you, the alehouse breathes and murmurs in its sleepward way. Low voices, a log settling in the hearth, the soft click of someone fingering prayer beads or perhaps counting coins in the dark. The half-burned candle near the counter bends and gutters. From outside comes the faintest sound of wind easing through the yard. And there, just before sleep takes you, you think of the road again, the toll gate, the shrines, the rain at the crossing, and feel the strange comfort of knowing that for one night at least, all that mud remains outside an oak door you do not have to open until morning. Morning comes first as sound. Not the loud sound of anyone trying to be helpful, which would be intolerable, but the layered, unembarrassed sounds of a house waking around people who would all prefer one more hour beneath wool and smoke. A log shifts in the hearth with a soft crack. Someone near the benches clears his throat like a man arguing with life itself. The dog gives a single sigh from under a table. Above you, in the loft, straw rustles and a boot thumps against a beam. Then, from farther off faint through shutters, rain-washed air, and the last folds of sleep you hear bells. Monastery bells. They travel differently from parish bells. Parish bells call a village. Monastery bells seem to arrange the world whether or not the world asks them to. These come slow and measured through the mist beyond the alehouse yard, each stroke falling with a certainty your own bones do not currently share. You open your eyes to the dim underside of the ladder and the grey beginning of day. The blanket has shifted in the night. Your left shoulder is cold. Your heel complains at once, delighted to find you conscious again. Around you the alehouse is all stale warmth, extinguished candle smoke, damp wool, and the sour rich memory of last night's ale. The half-burned candle by the counter has finally died into a bent white stub. The cooper, who evidently believes sleep should be heard and respected from a distance, is still snoring somewhere beyond a barrel. Medieval lodging is, among other things, an education in the private acoustics of strangers. You sit up slowly and pull on your boots with the grave expression of a man re-entering negotiations with his feet. At the far side of the room, the innkeeper's already moving, practical as weather. She ladles something steaming into bowls while a serving girl breaks coarse bread into chunks. There is no morning softness to the place, no gentle domestic fiction that everyone is delighted to be awake. The day has begun, therefore people must eat and leave. This honesty is, in its way, refreshing. You take your bowl to a bench near the hearth. It is pottage barley thinned with yesterday's broth, a few softened leeks, perhaps a pea or two, and enough salt to prove someone still believes in effort. You eat without complaint. On the road, breakfast is measured less by delight than by whether it prevents collapse before noon. The wool factor is already up, wrapping his cloak around shoulders that appear permanently adapted to bad weather. He nods toward the window where daylight gathers in a smear of pewter. You hear that? The bells. He grunts. Abbey's not far. Guest house takes travellers sometimes. If they've room, and if you don't arrive behaving like an unpaid miracle, that is a useful standard. It keeps many men outdoors. A monastery guest house. The idea settles into your tired mind like warm broth. You had meant only to walk until the next market town, but the road after rain is slower than intention, and a place of dry stone, ordered hours, and perhaps a bowl not served with a joke about the floor suddenly sounds like astonishing refinement. After breakfast you settle your account, recover your pack, and step once more into the yard. The world has been washed clean but not improved. Mist lies low over the hedges. Water drips from the eaves in steady intervals. The carts under the lean-to shine dark with damp. Your breath rises pale in the cold morning air, and somewhere beyond the lane the bells continue. Patient as monks and twice as persistent, you set out toward them. The road from the alehouse slopes gently upward through a patchwork of fields divided by stone walls and muddy paths. Sheep stand in little clumps, chewing with the resigned gravity of creatures who have accepted that the weather is a long insult. Crows move between furrows, here and there. Smoke climbs from chimneys, straight at first in the stillness and then dissolving into the mist. The lane is quiet enough that your own steps seem unduly loud. Walking after shelter always feels briefly unwise. The body has remembered comfort and now objects to being consulted no further. Yet there is also a strange freshness in the cold. Your clothes, though not fully dry, are less sodden than yesterday. Your pack sits more familiarly on your shoulders. The road, at least at this hour, has the courtesy to keep its mud shallow. As the bells draw nearer, so do signs of the monastery's reach. You pass a small stone cross at a fork in the lane, its base ringed with dead ivy and wax drippings from candles long since gone out. Then comes an orchard bounded by a low wall, the trees bare-limbed and beaded with moisture. Beyond that, a fish pond gleams pale through reeds. Monasteries are holy, certainly, but they are also profoundly interested in practical things: ponds, gardens, ledgers, mills, honey, wool, vineyards where climate allows, and land measured in rents and obligations. Heaven, it turns out, rests on very tidy accounts. At last the abbey emerges from the fog. It does not leap into view. It gathers itself slowly, first the high line of a tower, then a stretch of wall, then the dark slope of tiled roofs above stone buildings set around a central church. The place is not splendid in the manner of a lord's keep. It is more composed than that, more deliberate. Worn stone, narrow windows, a gatehouse with an arch broad enough for carts, a little outer yard where two lay brothers unload sacks from a donkey while a novice, thin as a candlewick, hurries past with a basket of bread covered in linen. The bells stop just as you reach the gate. The sudden quiet feels enormous. A porter sits within the gatehouse on a stool beside an oak table polished by elbows and years. He wears a plain dark habit with a hood thrown back, revealing a face neither warm nor unkind, simply practised in receiving wet people with uncertain intentions. At his side hangs an iron key ring heavy enough to anchor a small boat. You greet him politely and state your business as humbly as your profession permits a traveller. Road-worn, peaceable, willing to pay a fair offering for a place in the guest-house if one may be had. He considers you, then your pack, then your boots. Monastic hospitality, you suspect, begins the same way toll collection does with an inventory of likely inconvenience. You carry no weapons beyond a knife for bread, he asks. No more than bread deserves. His mouth shifts very slightly, which might almost count as amusement in a gatekeeper. And you are bound where northward in time, somewhere sensible in intention. That is not always the same place. No, you say, I have noticed. He rises, takes up his keys, and gestures for you to follow. Inside the gate, the abbey yard is swept surprisingly clean despite the weather. Stone flags gleam with moisture. A well sits near the centre under a timbered cover. To one side stands the church, long and severe, its windows set with leaded glass dull in the grey light. To another stretch the domestic building's kitchen, bakehouse, storerooms, perhaps the infirmary. You smell wet stone, wood smoke, and something green and sharp from an herb garden enclosed by wattle, sage, maybe, rue. Lavender gone woody in the cold. Monasteries preserve remedies the way other people preserve grudges carefully and in writing. A novice passes you carrying a bucket and nearly collides with the porter in his haste. He mutters an apology and hurries on, cheeks pink with mortification. The porter does not even sigh. This has clearly happened before. The guest-house stands a little apart from the cloister itself, a long building of stone with shuttered windows and a porch under which 2 walking staffs lean drying against the wall. Good sign. Other travellers have come before you and survived the experience. Within, the air is cool but dry, and after the alehouse it feels almost austere enough to be medicinal. The floor is strewn with fresh rushes that still smell faintly green. Simple wooden benches line the walls. A trestle table stands near the hearth, where only a modest fire burns, as though any larger blaze might encourage vanity. A lay brother shows you where to set your pack and gives you a cup of watered ale, with the expression of a man distributing mercy in measured amounts. You may wash there, he says, indicating a basin near the wall. Dinner after sext, bread at noon if needed. No shouting, gaming, or arguing doctrine at the table. That last one rules out many merchants. It also rules out some clerics. This abbey, you decide, may know the world better than it pretends. You wash your face and hands in water cold enough to qualify as moral instruction. Mud lifts from your skin in brown swirls. You smooth back your hair, wring the edge of your cloak, and for the first time in 2 days feel almost like a man rather than a bundle of road attached to a face. By midday the mist has thinned, and the abbey moves through its hours with calm precision. Bells mark the offices. Monks pass in 2s and 3s along covered walks, dark habits brushing stone. No one hurries except novices, and even they do so with an air of apologizing to time. From somewhere beyond an inner door comes the faint scratch of quills, scribes at work. You picture them in a room lit by narrow windows and beeswax candles, heads bent over parchment, fingers stained, lips moving slightly as they shape letters that will outlast your boots by centuries. There is a comfort in that sort of labour, though you would not personally choose it over walking unless the walking became especially wet. A little before noon you were given bread, a piece of hard cheese, and a seat near the hearth. Across from you sits another guest, a pilgrim with a patched cloak and a staff tipped in iron. A pewter badge hangs at his collar in the form of crossed keys. From Rome, you ask. From a man who said he had been, he replies, which is nearly as costly. You nod in respect, and perhaps more comfortable. He smiles faintly and shares, in the quiet way of guest houses, that he is bound toward a shrine reputed to ease pains of the chest. Some swear that dust from the saint's tomb mixed with wine can cure weakness in the lungs. Others insist only the journey itself heals. by giving a man enough air and misery to force gratitude on him. No one can quite agree whether relics mend the body or merely persuade it to continue. In the afternoon, with permission, you wander only as far as the outer cloister walk. The stone there is worn smooth by generations of sandalled feet. Water gathers in the courtyard grass. A few winter herbs cling stubbornly to life near the wall. Through an open door you glimpse the scriptorium, at last 3 monks seated at desks, heads bent, one holding a penknife to trim a quill, another dusting a page with fine sand. The room smells faintly of parchment, ink, wax, and discipline. It is one of the most peaceful sights you've seen on the road. Also one of the least suitable for sneezing. Beyond that lies the church itself, where the dimness is rich and cool and touched here and there by muted colour through glass. Candles burn before side altars. A woman kneels near a pillar with her hands folded tightly enough to suggest either deep devotion or a serious dispute with heaven. You do not stay long. The place asks for quiet and gives it back, multiplied. By evening the guest house gathers a few more travellers, 2 drovers, a widow going to kin farther north, and a boy carrying letters for some minor household. Supper is simple pottage again, with beans this time, coarse bread, and a little smoked fish because the abbey keeps proper fasts and proper stores. No one speaks much. The bells have gentled the day into smaller thoughts. After the meal, a lay brother sets a beeswax candle near the wall and warns you not to let it gutter onto the bench. Wax is dear, he says, as are benches, you reply. He looks at you for a moment, then decides that wit is not in itself a violation of rule. Sleep early, he says. Matin's bells trouble those not used to them. You believe him. So you spread your cloak on a narrow pallet, pull a wool blanket over yourself, and lie listening as the abbey settles into its breathing, distant footsteps on stone. A door closing gently, wind touching the shutters, and somewhere beyond all that, the faintest memory of bells still organising the dark. For one night, the merchant's road bends to holy rhythm, and you, who yesterday slept beside a ladder under the sovereignty of a snoring cooper, now drift toward rest in a house where time itself seems to have taken vows. Before dawn, the bells wake you again. Not harshly, not even abruptly. They rise through the dark like something remembered rather than heard, low and measured, each stroke spreading softly through stone, timber, blanket, and bone. For a moment you do not know where you are. The pallet beneath you is firmer than the alehouse floor, the air cooler, the silence between sounds more deliberate. Then the smell of wax, old stone, and faint wood smoke settles the matter. The monastery. Somewhere beyond the guest house wall, monks are already moving toward prayer while the rest of the world still clings to sleep, and you lie under your blanket listening to them pass in soft steps that barely trouble the corridor. It is a curious comfort, this sense that others are awake to carry the hour for you. On the road, darkness belongs mostly to worry, cold, and the occasional animal making a suspiciously confident noise in a hedge. Here, it belongs to order. You stay still until the bells fade, then you rise. The room is blue-grey with early light not yet fully committed to being morning. The other guests are shapes beneath wool, though one of the drovers is already sitting up and blinking at the wall as if it has disappointed him personally. You dress in silence, pull on your boots with more gratitude than they deserve, and gather your things. Your cloak is dry now, or dry enough to count as encouragement. When you shoulder your pack, the weight feels both familiar and unreasonable. In the hall outside, a lay brother has left a basket of bread ends and a jug of watered ale for those departing early. Monasteries understand travellers the way blacksmiths understand iron, not tenderly, perhaps, but accurately. You take a piece of bread, murmur your thanks to no one in particular, and step into the abbey yard. The cold strikes cleanly. Mist lies low over the ground, whitening the edges of the buildings and drifting through the herb beds in pale ribbons. The church tower rises above it all, dark against a sky just beginning to lighten at the rim. A novice crosses the yard with a lantern hooded against the wind. The porter, already at his post, lets you through with a nod that suggests you have passed some mild test merely by leaving quietly. Beyond the gate, the road waits. It leads first through open fields silvered with damp, then toward a long belt of woodland that crouches along the horizon like a thought the land would rather not explain. You had noticed it yesterday from the higher ground near the abbey orchards, but distance had softened it. Up close, it is less decorative. The trees stand thick together, their trunks black with moisture, their branches bare and interlocked overhead like fingers in prayer or warning. The porter had mentioned the forest road while handing back your walking staff. Keep the track, he said. If mist thickens, trust the ruts, not your confidence. That sounds applicable to most things. It is. So now you walk toward the trees with that advice lodged firmly in your mind. The morning is so quiet at first that each small sound grows importance. The scrape of your boot on stone before the road turns to mud again. A crow flapping up from a boundary post. The faint clink of buckle against pack frame. Far behind you, one last bell from the monastery, softened by distance until it feels less like sound and more like blessing. Ahead, the woodland takes that blessing and gives nothing back. You reach the first trees just as the light begins to seep properly into the day. At once the air changes. It grows stiller, cooler, touched with the smell of wet bark, old leaves, moss, and the dark mineral scent of earth long shaded. The track narrows between roots and shallow puddles. Yesterday's rain lingers here in every hollow. Branches drip steadily, not because it is still raining, but because forests enjoy continuing the argument after weather has left. You slow without meaning to. Everyone does. A forest road before sunrise or just after it has a way of enlarging the ordinary. A twig snaps somewhere to your right and sounds like an event. A bird rustles in the undergrowth and seems briefly capable of opinions. Your own breathing grows too noticeable. The old stories begin creeping closer then, as naturally as mist. You do not exactly believe them, of course, but that has never stopped them from being nearby. Some swear that bells heard in a wood after dawn are not always church bells, but the dead remembering processions. Others insist that monks once taught wolves to keep paths clear around abbey lands, and that their descendants still watch travellers with the discipline unknown to ordinary beasts. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such tales are meant to warn a person, entertain him, or simply make sure he keeps walking briskly. You adjust your grip on the staff and continue. The road, if it can still be flattered by that name, winds through the trees in two muddy lines separated by a raised centre slick with leaves. In places roots have lifted the ground. In others, water stands dark and reflective as metal. You step where others have stepped into hoof prints, around stones, over fallen twigs. The porter was right. Confidence is of limited use here. Better to trust the ruts. They at least have been wrong in company. After half an hour or so, you hear someone ahead. Not speaking at first, but coughing, then muttering, then the distinct slap of someone trying unsuccessfully to free a boot from mud. As you round a bend, you find the source a tinker or peddler by the look of him. thin as a switch and wrapped in a patched brown cloak, standing beside a handcart whose narrow wheel has sunk deep into one side of the track. He looks up sharply when he hears you, relief and suspicion arriving together. "Morning," he says, as though testing whether you are human. "So far," you answer. He snorts. "Help me with this devil. You set down your pack and take hold of the cart. It is lighter than it looks, but angled badly. One wheel buried to the hub in a patch of softened ground disguised by leaves. Together you rock it once, twice, then heave hard enough that mud sucks noisily and lets go with insulting reluctance. The cart lurches free. Both of you stagger back half a step, splattered to the shin. "There," you say. "There," he agrees, as though the mud might hear and change its mind. His wares are covered beneath canvas, but you glimpse enough to guess at pans, small tools, wire, perhaps a few needles and pins, maybe buckles, competition, in other words, though the road tends to flatten rivalry into sympathy when everyone is equally damp. "You from the Abbey?" he asks. "This morning." "Then you've had the good bread." "I've had some bread." He nods as if that distinction matters. "Road ahead forks by an old ash. Keep left unless you fancy bog water." That advice comes dear, only if ignored. You thank him, shoulder your pack again, and go on, leaving him to his rattling cart and private grievances. Behind you, the forest resumes its patient dripping. The deeper you go, the stranger the light becomes. Dawn has fully come elsewhere, perhaps, but under the bare interwoven branches it arrives in fragments, here a pale patch on wet bark, there a silver line across a puddle, then nothing but dimness again. Moss brightens at the roots of fallen trunks. Ferns, browned by season, sag in clumps along the banks. Once you pass a little shrine nailed to a tree, just a tiny carved virgin in a box-like frame, sheltered by a scrap of lead overhang, with wax hardened at the base and a thread of blue ribbon tied to the trunk. You stop a moment. No one can quite agree whether forest shrines are for protection against getting lost, against robbers, against spirits, or simply against the sort of thoughts that grow too large under trees. Some swear that if a ribbon tied in a wood shrine fades quickly, rain is coming. Others say it means the saint accepted the prayer with unusual speed. The ribbon on this one has gone almost white. You decide not to interpret. Still, you touch 2 fingers to the frame and incline your head before moving on. There is no harm in being politely defended from all available directions. For a while you walk entirely alone. This is not true in the practical sense. Birds are everywhere, unseen but busy, and once a deer breaks from cover ahead of you with such sudden grace that your heart gives an undignified leap, it bounds across the track and vanishes through the trees in 3 clean motions, leaving only the trembling of branches behind. Yet the feeling of solitude remains. The forest swallows distance. Sound does not carry well. Even when others are near, they disappear quickly into the turns and folds of the land. You become aware, too, of your own body in a new way. The ache in your shoulders, the warm spot on your heel held in uneasy truce, the hunger beginning again already, despite monastery bread. Travelling is mostly the art of being slightly uncomfortable in a sequence of landscapes. At last the track opens a little around what must be the old ash the tinker mentioned. It stands in a clearing no larger than a yard, enormous and half hollow, its bark ridged and black with age. One great limb has long since torn away, leaving a wound silvered by weather. At its base lie bits of old offerings, hazelnut shells, a cracked clay token, a strip of wool, and a tiny iron nail bent into a loop. Folk practices cling longest to old trees. Priests may sigh about it, but even respectable people will still tie a ribbon where their grandmother tied one, just in case. The road divides there, one branch descending toward wetter ground, the other skirting a low rise. You take the left path, grateful for the tinker's advice. By mid-morning the wood begins to thin. Light strengthens. The trees stand farther apart. You pass stacks of cut timber under rough cover, and a charcoal burner's blackened circle half hidden among bracken. Cold now, but recent enough that the ash still smells faintly sharp. Signs of work. Then, signs that the forest is not only feared or storied, but used, measured, entered with axes and carts and the same practical greed that all landscapes eventually endure. Not far beyond, you hear voices again, two men arguing amiably over the price of pig iron, if your ears do not deceive you. Then comes the sound of hooves on firmer ground. Then, suddenly, the edge of the wood. You step out into open light so bright it feels for a moment almost southern, though it is only a pale late-morning sun breaking through the thinning cloud. Fields spread ahead, furred with damp and edged by low walls. A distant hamlet smokes gently in the cold. Behind you the woodland waits in shadow, already withdrawing into story. You stop and turn once to look back. From out here the forest seems less ominous. Of course. Merely a long dark seam across the land. That is the trick of safe distance. It edits everything into reason. Yet you know the dripping branches, the swallowed light, the little shrine nailed to a trunk, the cough of the peddler, the deer bursting across the road, the old ash with its ribbons and nails. You know how large small sounds become in there, and how even a practical man finds himself nodding respectfully to carvings in trees. You eat the last of your bread while standing in the sun, and it tastes better than it should. Perhaps that is the real superstition of the road, not that forest holds spirits, but that leaving them always makes ordinary things briefly holy. Then you shift your pack. Listen to the distant world open again with carts and crows and far-off human work, and continue toward whatever market, toll, rumour, and shelter lie ahead beyond the bright fields. By the time the sun has climbed high enough to lose its morning innocence, the road has changed character again. The forest is behind you now, drawn back into a dark line on the horizon, and the land ahead feels busier, more occupied by human intention. Fields give way to gardens, gardens give way to cottages, then come fenced yards, dung heaps steaming faintly in the chill, and the first hints of industry a cooper's yard with staves stacked in circles, a strip of dyed cloth hanging limp on a line, a smithy ringing somewhere out of sight. All of it leans gradually toward one destination. Trade has a gravity of its own. You can feel it tugging you onward before you ever see the town. When you do see it, it is not a grand place, but it is a proud one. The market town rises from a fold in the land, built around a square of cold stone and packed close within a low wall broken by two gate towers. It has no soaring splendour, no polished elegance, only the compact confidence of a place that has learned how to count, bargain, and survive. Roofs crowd together beneath the pale light. Smoke lifts from 100 chimneys. A church tower stands above the rest, square and weathered, with bells that will surely speak before long whether anyone wishes to hear them or not. You pass through the gate with less ceremony than in the earlier town, though not without scrutiny. The guard here seems more interested in whether you're carrying live pigs or contagious enthusiasm than in your precise trade, and for that you are grateful. Inside. The streets narrow quickly toward the market square, and the sound reaches you first shouting, hammering, laughter, the creak of cart axles, the bark of dogs, the cry of poultry, and beneath it all the ceaseless layered murmur of people engaged in the ancient and sacred ritual of pretending their wares are worth more than they are. The square itself opens before you like a stage already mid-performance. It is paved in uneven stone worn slick in places by years of boots and weather. Around its edges stand timbered houses with overhanging upper stories, shops on the ground level, storage lofts above. A stone market cross rises near the centre, its carvings rubbed soft by age and hands. Stalls and trestle tables fill the open space in ragged rows, baskets of onions and turnips, bolts of coarse cloth, jugs of ale, strings of dried fish, beeswax candles, iron nails, leather pouches, pies of uncertain ancestry, combs, pins, ribbons, gloves, little painted saints, wooden spoons, and all the other objects by which ordinary life insists on continuing. You stop just long enough to take it in. This is where the road turns visible. All those miles of mud, tolls, shrines, rain, bells, and aching shoulders lead here, to this square where need and vanity stand shoulder to shoulder, and both expect a bargain. A merchant's work is often described as movement, but that is only half true. The other half is this stopping in the right place and arranging hope attractively on a board. First, though, you must secure a spot. That requires finding the market reeve, or his deputy, or the clerk who serves as a human obstacle between commerce and chaos. You locate him near the cross, seated at a folding table under an awning with a wax tablet, a tally stick, and the expression of a man who has not trusted a traveller since infancy. Ink stains mark 2 fingers of his left hand. A little iron weight sits on the table beside him, perhaps for weighing fees, perhaps for knocking sense into people who ask too many questions. You wait while he finishes with a fishwife who appears to have bullied him professionally for years. Then he looks up. Trade cloth and small goods. Selling today, that is the dream. Dreams cost a halfpenny by the wall, a penny nearer the cross. You glance at the wall side of the square. More foot traffic near the cross, certainly, but higher fee, louder neighbours, greater competition. By the wall the crowd thins a little, but people slow there as they pass toward the well and the church lane. Enough, perhaps. By the wall, you say. He marks something, takes your coin, and points you toward an empty section between a candle seller and a man with baskets so aggressively wicked they look personal. You thank him. He does not thank you back. Administrative dignity must be protected where found. The place you are given is hardly generous, a patch of stone beside the wall, where a drain runs underfoot and a draught comes down the lane as if it has legal right. But it is a place, and a place is everything. You set down your pack, unfold your cloth, and begin. There is a quiet pleasure in arranging wares. Not a grand pleasure, perhaps, but the sort that steadies the mind. Folded cloth first, sorted by colour and quality. The finer pieces toward the front where hands may be tempted, then the ribbons, combs, pins, laces, needles in wrapped packets, a few small buckles, a pair of gloves, a little knife with a bone handle, and 2 brass brooches polished this morning on your sleeve until they nearly resemble prosperity. You know better than to display everything at once. Some things are kept back, both for safety and for the small theatre of perhaps I have something else that might suit. Beside you. The candle seller nods once in greeting. She's a narrow-faced woman in a dark hood with forearms strengthened by years of handling wax and moulds. Her stall smells wonderfully of honey and smoke. First time here, she asks. First in this square. Watch the basket man, she says without looking toward him. He shouts when trade is bad and whistles when it is worse. The basket man hears this. Naturally. I sing, he corrects, offended. You commit noises in sequence, she replies. Excellent. You think. This is promising. Soon the market is properly in motion. The first customers are rarely the best. They are browsers, early circlers, people measuring the square before they commit their coin. Still, you must greet them with patience. A merchant who looks too eager invites suspicion. A merchant who looks bored invites abandonment. The proper expression is one of mild availability, as though selling a ribbon or comb is not only possible but a quiet favour to civilization. A woman in a fur-lined cloak stops first, not for the cloth but for the needles. She examines the packet through narrowed eyes. Good steel, good enough to outlive the thread. She considers, that is not the same thing. No, but it is cheaper. This pleases her more than flattery would have. She buys two. Then come a pair of servant girls sent, you suspect, with exact instructions and insufficient coin. They finger the ribbons, compare colours, whisper, reject one as too bright, another as too dull, and finally choose a narrow blue strip after 10 minutes of discussion, so earnest one might think they were settling a border dispute. You wrap it carefully. People who pay little still wish to feel they have bought well, especially them. By noon the square thickens. Farmers arrive late with eggs and butter. A butcher's boy threads through the crowd with a tray of sausages hung from a pole and cries them with heroic conviction. A group of monks appears near the fish stall, each trying very hard to seem uninterested in the smell. 2 children race past carrying hot oat cakes and are caught at once by a woman who has either given birth to both or simply appointed herself guardian of velocity. The church bell rings the hour. Conversation pauses only enough to adjust around it. Bells are like weather in market towns acknowledged, absorbed, rarely obeyed for long. A prosperous-looking man in a brown-hooded mantle stops before your cloth. He touches it with 2 fingers, which is always ominous. People who intend to buy often ask first. People who intend to negotiate begin with touching. Too fine for this weather, he says. That depends whether you wear it in the rain or indoors after surviving it. He lifts a brow, and the price. You name it. He makes the face all men make when told the price of cloth, ale, horses, shoes, or basically anything not already theirs. I could get cheaper. You could get rougher, you say. Cheaper often travels with rougher. They are close kin. He rubs the weave between finger and thumb, tempted despite himself. Then begins the slow, formal dance of bargaining. He quotes a lower price. You decline with courtesy. He discovers a flaw invisible to saints and scholars alike. You admire his eyesight and reduce the price by less than he hoped. He sighs like a widower. You hesitate like a philosopher. At last you meet in the middle, where all true medieval peace treaties eventually settle. He pays. You fold the remaining cloth with the serene expression of a man who has not just spent 10 minutes verbally wrestling over half a penny, and the dignity of wool. This is market theatre. Everyone knows the lines, but the performance matters. Buyers like to feel they have won. Sellers like to feel they have resisted heroically. The truth usually lies somewhere in between, counting coins. A little later comes a priest looking for waxed thread, then an old woman seeking a comb strong enough for real hair, not the thoughts of hair sold in cheaper places. Then a boy sent to buy pins who spends so much time staring at the brass brooches that you suspect his mother will soon own one by mysterious accident. You sell him the pins and, after a solemn warning against irresponsibility. Also, a tiny pewter clasp cheap enough to satisfy his ambition without destroying his household. The candle seller beside you moves goods steadily and says very little unless provoked. Yet now and then she offers observations without turning her head. That one won't pay until his wife arrives. This one haggles from habit, not poverty. Do not let the baker's apprentice lean on your table. He smells of flour and theft. She is right about all three. Mid-afternoon brings a moment of spectacle. A cloth merchant from the better end of the square begins arguing with a customer over weights, measures, or honesty. These things often overlap. Voices rise, heads turn. The Reeves clerk stands, hoping to appear authoritative. The fishwife from earlier shouts unsolicited judgment from 3 stalls away. The basket man takes the opportunity to whistle what may be a tune and may also be mockery. No one can quite agree afterward what the dispute was truly about, only that the customer left offended and the merchant remained offended, which suggests balance was preserved. Some swear market crosses keep fraud in check by reminding all involved that saints dislike false measures. Others say the crosses mainly provide a respectable thing to point at while lying. Even now, it is hard to tell whether holiness improves trade or merely gives it better scenery. By late afternoon, your feet begin to harden into misery again. Standing is its own kind of marching. The cold stone beneath you has worked upward through soul and bone with monastic discipline. You eat a chunk of bread and a bit of onion between customers, washing it down with thin ale bought from a boy carrying a small keg and the confidence of a prince. The onion is sharp enough to wake forgotten ancestors. You feel briefly immortal. The light starts to slope. Shadows from the wall lengthen across your display. The crowd shifts from purposeful buyers to evening wanderers, people lingering, gossiping, calculating whether one more purchase can be justified before supper. This is a good hour for small wares, ribbons, pins, combs, things people can desire without needing to explain them to a steward, spouse, or priest. A young wife buys a strip of green braid for mending, though neither of you believes that for a heartbeat. A servant chooses a bone needle case with the reverence of someone acquiring private wealth. An old man buys the little bone-handled knife after testing its edge on his thumbnail and nodding as if it has passed a moral exam. Coin gathers slowly in your pouch. Not lavishly, not enough to make the road seem sensible, but enough to justify the tolls, the rain, the shrines, the guest house, the forest, the aching shoulder, enough to remind you why merchants keep setting out again after each return. Around you the market begins its gradual folding inward. Sellers cover goods, count coppers, sweep peelings and straw from beneath tables. Carts are drawn closer. The candle seller pinches out one of her display flames with damp fingers and wraps unsold tapers in cloth. The basket man, trade apparently satisfactory, refrains from both whistling and song. You look up toward the church tower just as the bell rings again through the cooling air. It spreads over the square, over cloth and fish and wax and onion skins, over the market cross and the Reeves table and the darkening stone, and for a moment everything seems briefly held together by its sound. Trade, faith, hunger, vanity, need, all gathered in one place before night unthreads them. You begin packing your remaining wares with careful hands. The day in the square is ending. Your goods are lighter, your purse is heavier. Your back, regrettably, has noticed both facts and is now preparing a speech. Still, as you tie the last bundle and glance once more across the cold, busy heart of the town, you feel that particular merchant satisfaction, not joy exactly, but the quieter comfort of having stood in the centre of noise and need, and made your small, honest share of the world's business from it. By the time you leave the market square, the light has thinned to that pale, uncertain hour when every errand begins to feel unnecessary except finding supper and a place to sit down. The town is still alive around you, but it has changed key. The loud bargaining has softened into evening talk. Shutters are being drawn in. Apprentices carry in boards and baskets. A woman sweeps wilted cabbage leaves into the gutter with the determination of one who considers daylight personally responsible. From somewhere close comes the smell of baking oatcakes. From somewhere less welcome, the smell of tanned hides making their final argument with the air. Your own day has been a good one by merchant standards, which means not that you are rich, but that you have not been embarrassed by reality. The coins in your pouch have a little more weight now. Your cloth bundle is smaller. A few packets of needles, several ribbons, the bone-handled knife, and one of the brass brooches are gone, transformed into copper and small silver by the mysterious miracle of human preference. You ought to feel light. Instead, your body has chosen this moment to tally the cost. Your shoulders are raw where the strap has pressed, your calves are thick with fatigue, and your left heel, quiet only through business, has resumed its long sermon on the wages of ambition. So when you find a place to sleep that night, a loft corner above a cooper's shed, paid for with 2 small coins and a promise not to complain about the smell of oak shavings, you accept it with gratitude. It is not elegant. The ladder is rude, the roof draughty, and somewhere below a hen objects intermittently to existence. But there is straw, a wool blanket of uncertain history, and the deeply attractive possibility of horizontal life. You sleep hard. Then morning arrives, and with it the part of the journey no one sings about. You wake to a grey, practical dawn filtering through the cracks in the boards. The town below has not yet fully stirred, but already you hear the first working sounds: a bucket set down, a gate hinge groaning, someone splitting kindling in a yard, a cartwheel being tested by hand. Your body is no longer asleep, but it has not agreed to participate. When you sit up, your spine sends a message upward so clear it might as well be written in ink. You descend the ladder carefully, like an old relic being lowered from a niche. The cooper's wife, a broad woman with flour on one sleeve and no interest in morning nonsense, sells you bread, a wedge of white cheese, and a cup of hot ale flavoured with something bitter and herbal, horehound perhaps, or tansy. Medieval people firmly believe that anything unpleasant must surely be helping. Some swear hot ale with herbs restores strength to the legs. Others say it merely convinces a tired man he has been treated seriously. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the cure works or whether the kindness does. You eat standing in the yard, wrapped in your cloak against the cold. The bread is dense, the cheese sharp, the ale medicinal enough to frighten weakness back into hiding. Nearby, the cooper himself is already at work fitting an iron hoop to a barrel. The mallet blows ringing through the morning air with grim steadiness. "You heading out?" he asks without pausing. "Yes," he grunts. Road east turns bad after the stream. That narrows it only slightly. This is worse. Wheel-breaking ground. You thank him for the warning, though privately you suspect all roads describe themselves that way when spoken of by men who no longer have to walk them. Still, by the time you pass beyond the town wall and into the pale open country, you discover he was not exaggerating. The morning is colder than the last few. Frost lies low in the grass and in the shaded ditches, not heavy enough to whiten the whole world, but enough to silver edges and make every tuft and thorn seem briefly delicate. The sky is clear at first, washed pale and hard above the land. Your breath comes in white bursts. The fields stretch outward in long strips of winter use stubbled, turned, or lying fallow, broken here and there by hedges, barns, and low stone boundaries. The road begins well enough. It rolls over firm ground between fields where crows pick at what the harvest left behind. You pass a man driving 2 pigs with more persuasion than success, and a girl carrying a yoke with pails that swing and flash in the morning light. Far off, a church bell sounds once, then again, small in the cold distance. It reminds you of the abbey, of the half-burned candle in the guest house, of the ink-stained scribes bent over their pages while you slept. That world already seems improbably clean. Then you come to the stream. It is not wide, but the road leading down to it has been churned by carts into a miserable descent of slick ruts and clay. The crossing itself is little more than a shallow ford over rounded stones, and on the far side the bank rises sharply into a patch of road the cooper described accurately as wheel-breaking ground. A cart stands there at an angle, halted in distress. One wheel is split at the rim, and the wagon now leans like a tired drunk against its own load of sacks and bundled tools. A man and a woman stand beside it, not arguing exactly, but exchanging remarks in the careful tones of people who are saving their true anger for later when there is soup. You slow, then stop. The merchant's road teaches selfishness in inches and fellowship in accidents. A man can keep walking past trouble, yes, but only by trusting that when his own wheel fails, others will also have learned nothing. Besides, the road is narrow here. Even had you wished to ignore them, the broken cart has made philosophy impossible. Bad morning, you say, which feels safely obvious. The man turns. He's thick through the middle, red-cheeked from effort and cold, with a cap pulled low and mud to both knees. That depends, he says. Do you mend wheels with your eyes? Only badly? Then yes. Bad morning. The woman, younger than him and sharper in face and manner, wipes her hands on her apron and eyes your pack. You from the market town I am. Then you've seen a wheelwright. Yesterday. Useful, she says dryly. We have one now too, in memory. You step closer to inspect the damage. One section of the wooden rim has cracked clean through, and the strain of the load has opened it wider. Not beyond repair, perhaps, but beyond motion in its current condition. The axle groans each time the cart shifts. One mule stands nearby, tied to a post and chewing with total emotional detachment, which only makes the scene feel more human by contrast. What are you carrying, you ask? Tools, pots, little ironwork, some cured skins. The man gestures toward the load. Nothing heavy enough to justify this, and nothing light enough to carry cheerfully. A wheel broken on the road is more than inconvenience. It is delay, lost trade, uncertain shelter, and the constant danger of weather deciding to add its opinion. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether broken wheels are caused more often by rotten timber, bad road, bad luck, or the evil eye from a jealous neighbour. Looking at this cart, you suspect all 4 have made a modest investment. There is no wheelwright nearby. There's only the road, the stream, frost still lingering in the shaded mud, and whatever skill can be assembled from hands already cold. So you help. First the load must be lightened. Together you unlash sacks and bundles and carry them, one by one, to the verge where the grass is driest. A set of iron hooks, a bundle of leather strips, 2 sacks of grain, a basket of onions that rolls halfway open and sends 3 determined fugitives downhill toward the stream. The woman catches one with her foot. You retrieve another from a tuft of reeds. The 3rd escapes into history. Then comes the wheel itself. The man has tools enough: a mallet, wedges, a short saw, and a coil of rawhide thong kept, by some stroke of wisdom, beneath the seat. He explains between breaths that the cart belonged to his brother once, and before that to their father, which is to say, it has enjoyed a long and eventful career in not entirely ideal conditions. Old wood lasts until it remembers it is old, says the woman. That is true of many things. You reply, she snorts, and from then on you are accepted. The plan, such as it is, involves binding the cracked rim tightly enough with wet rawhide and a fitted strip of spare wood to get the cart to the next village, where a smith and wheelwright may argue properly over its future. It is not elegant. It is medieval, which is different. Medieval solutions often consist of tying, wedging, praying, and promising to do something better later. You brace the wheel while the man knocks the warped section back into place. The woman soaks the rawhide in the stream until her fingers turn red with cold. Mud claims your boots almost to the ankle. The mule watches with the expression of a saint who has given up on sinners. At one point an old traveller appears from the west road, leans on his staff, surveys the whole scene, and announces that rubbing goose grease into wheel joints prevents cracking. Some swear by it, he says, others by ash bark boiled in ale and painted on the spokes at midsummer. No one can quite agree whether these remedies truly preserve wood or merely give old men a reason to interrupt difficult work. Still, he holds the shaft while you lash the rawhide, and that counts for something. Bit by bit the repair takes shape. The spare strip is wedged against the broken section. The soaked rawhide is wound round and round the rim, pulled tight until your hands ache and the skin cuts damp lines across your palms. When it dries, it will shrink harder, for now it looks rough and desperate, which means it may very well function. At last the man stands back and wipes his brow with a muddy sleeve. Well, he says, it is now either a wheel or an insult. Roads rarely distinguish, says the woman. You reload the cart with slower care than before, balancing weight away from the damaged side. The mule is harnessed again. The man takes the shaft and eases the cart forward by inches. The wheel turns once, complains, turns again, holds. No one cheers. This is not that kind of age. But relief settles over the four of you with the warmth of a small hidden fire. The woman opens a cloth bundle and shares with you a piece of coarse bread and 2 dried apples leathery enough to have opinions. The man produces a little flask of ale and passes it around. Cold food at a roadside repair always tastes slightly ceremonial, as though the act of not being stranded has its own feast day. What's the next village, you ask? St. Ovin's Cross. If the cart agrees, says the man. There's a smith there, and a widow who rents half her shed to any soul with coin and manners. The woman glances at you. Have you either today? I can manage one. That already puts you ahead of 3 men I know. You sit for a few minutes on an overturned sack while the rawhide begins its slow drying in the sun. The frost has gone now from the field edges. Wind moves lightly over the open land, carrying the smell of earth, straw, and smoke from farms unseen beyond the rise. A charm hangs from the cart yoke, a little bundle of rosemary, rowan berries long shriveled, and a bent brass token tied with blue thread. For luck, you ask. For axle and animals, the woman says, my mother tied them, says wheels here envy, and do they? She looks at the cracked rim. They hear something. Soon enough the road calls again. It always does. The repaired cart creaks forward at a cautious pace, the mule setting the terms. You walk with them for a while over the rough ground east of the stream, where the road is all frozen ridges softening into mud under the noon sun. The fields spread wide on either side, pale and bare after harvest, with little clusters of labourers in the distance lifting, stacking, carrying, storing. Winter's work is quieter than summer's, but no less constant. There are turnips to pit, wood to cut, grain to guard, blankets to mend, leeks to patch, pigs to salt, beans to count. Medieval life has a remarkable gift for making every season look busy in a different direction. By early afternoon the cart is still holding, and the village roofs of St. Owen's Cross begin to show beyond a line of pollarded willows. You part there with handshakes and thanks, though the thanks are awkward on all sides because road kindness is easiest when treated as temporary and practical. The man offers you a strip of leather in payment. You refuse and accept instead a length of waxed cord from the woman, useful for pack repairs. It feels fair. Then you watch them go on slowly toward the smithy smoke, the patched wheel turning with a stubborn rhythm, the little charm at the yoke bouncing gently with each step. For a long moment after, you stand in the road alone. The fields lie open under the weak sun. Your hands smell of wet raw hide, wood, and stream water. Your back aches again from lifting. Yet the day has altered. It is no longer merely a road through frost and fatigue. It has become one of those travel days remembered later in fragments: the broken rim, the runaway onions, the old man with his wheel remedies, the woman's dry voice, the mule's indifference, the rawhide tightening around old wood and holding just enough. Then you tuck the waxed cord into your pouch, shift your pack back onto your shoulders, and carry on eastward over the cold open fields, leaving behind the stubborn cart and its fragile repair, but keeping the road's small shared labour with you. The road rises through the afternoon in long, patient folds of earth, and by the time the light begins to lean toward evening again, you can feel the shape of higher ground under your feet. It is not a mountain, nothing so dramatic. Medieval journeys are rarely improved by unnecessary grandeur. This is a broad hill country of grazed slopes, scrubby hedges, and stony outcrops where the wind has more room to think. The fields below lie pale and open behind you now, stitched with narrow lanes and thin threads of smoke from cottages and bakehouses. Ahead, on the high ground, something sterner gathers itself out of the amber dimness of late day. At first it is only a line, then a tower, then another, then, as you climb, the full shape of the keep appears against the cooling sky, a stone stronghold planted on the shoulder of the hill, square and practical, with curtain walls, corner towers, and a gatehouse already pricking itself with torchlight. It is not beautiful in the manner of chapels or abbeys. It is impressive the way a locked chest is impressive, solid, deliberate, and faintly suspicious of everyone nearby. You stop for a moment on the rise and look at it. A keep at dusk always seems to belong partly to story. Torchlight begins to bloom along the wall walk. A banner stirs above the gate tower in the wind, dark against the sky. Below the walls, the outer slope is terraced by little tracks worn by servants, messengers, drovers, and all the necessary people whose work never appears in songs. Somewhere down on the lower side of the hill stand barns and sheds, perhaps a brewhouse, a stable yard, maybe a smithy. Such places feed stone. Stone never feeds itself. Your legs are tired enough to object to one more climb, but a keep means shelter of a kind, and shelter has a persuasive theology all its own, so you keep walking. The road becomes rougher as it nears the hilltop, broken by exposed stone and cart ruts hardened, softened, and hardened again by weather. A pair of servants passes you driving a little train of pack donkeys upward, each loaded with sacks and a bundle of firewood lashed badly enough to invite judgment. One of the servants nods without slowing. The other gives you a quick measuring glance that begins at your boots, rises to your pack, and concludes, perhaps, that you're too tired to rob anyone effectively. That is accurate. The air grows sharper here. Wind comes clean across the open ground and works its way through the seams of your cloak. It carries the smell of wood smoke, horses, and something roasted from within the walls. Your stomach, sensing a possible conspiracy in its favour, wakes immediately. By the time you reach the gate, true dusk has settled. The gatehouse is lit by 2 torches in iron brackets, their flames pulling and flattening in the wind. The oak doors stand open for the moment, though a portcullis waits above with all the conversational warmth of a prison grate. Inside the archway stand 2 guards with spears and quilted jacks beneath their cloaks. One is young enough to still enjoy standing like a guard. The other has the expression of a man who's been cold in too many gateways to romanticize any part of it. You state your business plainly, a travelling merchant, light of goods, peaceable, seeking entry before full dark, willing to pay the customary due and offer wares if the household has use for them. The older guard looks toward a clerk seated just inside a narrow board table. There is always a clerk. This one wears a hood, fingerless gloves, and the fixed patience of someone who must turn human need into marks on parchment before supper. A tallow lamp sputters beside him, making the damp in the stone arch gleam yellow. He asks your name, your trade, where last lodged, whether you carry blades beyond your eating knife, whether you have letters of passage, whether you seek only the outer ward or hope, perhaps heroically, to enter the hall itself. Only what custom allows, you say. Custom allows what the steward allows, he replies, which is the sort of sentence all officials are born knowing. You surrender a modest entry fee, not cheerful, but survivable. He notes something on the parchment and sends a stable boy to fetch someone from the inner yard, perhaps a steward's man, perhaps simply the person appointed to decide where small merchants belong on cold evenings. While you wait beneath the arch, you take in the sounds of the place. Hooves clatter somewhere within, a dog barks, answered by another farther off. Men call to one another over the unloading of a cart. Chains shift, a door bangs. From beyond the inner ward comes the faint clang of hammer on metal from a smithy still at work. Above all this lies the murmur of a household settling into evening, servants carrying, guards changing post, kitchens reaching their busiest hour, hall fires being stirred to brighter life. The steward's man arrives presently, wrapped in a short fur-trimmed cloak and carrying a lantern. He has that brisk, dry manner particular to people who manage large houses and therefore believe the world would collapse without their irritation. Yet he is not unkind, merely efficient. You sell cloth, he asks, and small wares. Household might take some. You'll come no farther than the lower hall unless called. Beds in the outer lodging if there's room. If not, the gatehouse loft. The loft has a roof, most of it. You consider this a generous beginning. He leads you through the gate into the outer ward, and the keep's life opens around you at once. The yard is broad, beaten hard by many feet, with patches of mud shining in the lantern light. To one side stand stables, their doors open to warmth, horse breath, and the sweet dusty smell of hay. To another rises a long storehouse with heavy oak doors and an iron lock thick enough to discourage philosophy. Barrels stand stacked under an awning. Sacks of grain are being carried inward by 2 boys and a servant who looks as though he intends to outlive both through glare alone. Farther across the yard a row of smaller buildings crouches in the dark brewhouse. Bakehouse, perhaps the kitchen's outer rooms. Ahead looms the inner hall range, windows glowing amber behind shutters and horn panes. Smoke rolls from the high chimney. Men-at-arms cross before the steps carrying bundles of rushes for the floor. The whole place smells of damp stone, roast meat, hot iron, horses, and wood smoke layered thickly enough to feel like fabric. This, you think, is how power really lives, not only in towers and walls, but in stores, in keys, in salted sides of pork hanging behind locked doors, in bins of oats, in wool blankets aired and counted, in beeswax candles for the upper chambers and cheaper tallow for everyone else, in the endless motion of hands turning field into supper and rent into winter. The steward's man brings you first to a side chamber off the lower hall where lesser traders, messengers, and useful passers-by may be assessed without troubling anyone important. There, under 2 candles and the eye of a servant with a wax tablet, you lay out a few pieces of cloth, pins, and ribbons on a bench. You do not show everything. One never does. Soon enough a housekeeper arrives, followed by a maid carrying a basket and a look of permanent caution. The housekeeper is a narrow woman in dark wool with keys at her girdle and the expression of someone who could inventory a battlefield before breakfast. She inspects your wares with swift, competent hands. "This blue," she says, pinching a folded length between thumb and finger. "How does it hold colour better than gossip and longer than cheap dye?" She almost smiles, which on a face like hers counts as applause. She asks prices. You answer carefully, neither too humble nor foolishly high. Great households buy in bulk when they can, but they also possess professional suspicion. The maid lifts a ribbon, studies it against the candlelight, and is immediately corrected for touching before counting. You like the housekeeper at once. She is, in her way, a reeve of linens. After a measured exchange, she takes the blue cloth, 2 packets of needles, a length of braid, and one of your better combs, claiming it is for a waiting woman, though you suspect it may quietly serve her own standards first. Payment is promised through the clerk, which is mildly alarming, but in such houses coin moves by channels more ceremonial than immediate. "Do you carry charms?" asks the maid suddenly. The housekeeper shoots her a look. "We are not buying charms." The maid lowers her eyes. "No, mistress. But you have seen the little stitch sachets tied inside noble sleeves, the rowan over stable doors, the wax saints by beds of difficult children, the bunches of herbs hung in pantries against spoilage, and whatever else might creep in. Great houses may speak more elegantly than cottages, but they fear misfortune with equal creativity. I have a bit of red thread, you say mildly, and small brass pins, some use for swaddles or sleeves. The housekeeper makes a soft dismissive sound. We have thread. Still, the maid gives you one quick grateful glance, as though you've acknowledged a truth not fit for formal mention. Some swear that iron keys hung near cradle or bed keep wandering spirits from troubling sleep. Others say only bread, prayer, and a dry room accomplish anything. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but very few households choose just one defence. Your business concluded, you're taken at last to the lower hall itself. Here the keep softens a little. Not into comfort exactly. Stone never quite forgets itself, but into inhabited warmth. Rushes lie fresh on the floor, green gold under firelight. Long tables stand ready for evening meal, though only one is set now for the servants, guards, clerks, and lesser company. At the far end, above 3 broad steps, rises the high table where the lord's household may sit when in residence. Tonight it remains half prepared, suggesting either absence or private dining elsewhere. Iron candlesticks burn along the walls, smoke drifts upward into the rafters, where it darkens the beams and disappears among shadows. You are given a place on a bench not too near the hearth and not insultingly far from it either, a fair middle, the best many travellers can hope for. Supper arrives in stages carried by servants too busy to indulge anyone's gratitude. First course bread, then a thick pottage of peas and barley with little islands of fat glimmering on top, then slices of smoked mutton set on trenchers already softening beneath the juices. A jug of ale goes up and down the table with democratic speed. Across from you sits a young archer, rubbing life back into his fingers. Beside him an older servant in a patched but clean tunic eats with the calm efficiency of a man who has served through many winters and no longer expects novelty from food. Conversation gathers slowly. Not loud, for this is a household always half within earshot of rank, but lively enough. The archer wants news of the road. The servant wants to know grain prices in the town below. Another man farther down asks whether the abbey still sells honey at feast times. A kitchen boy carrying trenchers pauses long enough to inform everyone that the steward once fined a mason for bringing mud into the hall on a saint's day, which may or may not be true but is clearly treasured as a story. You answer what you can. In return you learn that the lord is away visiting kin or court or perhaps settling some matter of land, that the lady keeps stricter chapel hours than the chaplain enjoys, and that the kennel master swears one of the hounds can smell strangers before they crest the hill. Some swear dogs in hill keeps also see spirits moving along the wall, walks at dead winter midnight, especially where old blood or older oaths were spilled. The archer claims this confidently. The older servant merely tears his bread and says hounds mostly smell bacon. This seems the saner doctrine. As the meal goes on, your body loosens by degrees. The fire helps. So does the roof. So does the enormous simple relief of not walking. You notice the small details that make a keep's household feel distinct from monastery or alehouse. Iron keys at belts, the rhythm of service from kitchen door to table and back again. A clerk entering twice with scraps of parchment and leaving with bones for a dog. The better candles reserved for the upper end of the hall, their beeswax sweeter and steadier than the smoking tallow near the side door. A servant scattering clean rushes where damp boots have crushed the old. After supper, the steward's man returns with your payment honestly counted to your surprise and tells you there is space in the outer lodging after all. Better than the gatehouse loft. He says it as though granting mercy to a criminal, but you thank him sincerely. The lodging proves to be a long chamber near the inner wall, lined with pallets and wool blankets. Draughty. Yes, but cleaner than many inns and infinitely quieter than a cooper's loft. Through a narrow shutter slit you can see the yard below where torchlight swings and dims in the wind. Somewhere a horse stamps. Somewhere farther off a bell rings from a chapel tucked within the keep's walls. Its sound small and contained compared to abbey bells, yet no less sure of itself. You unlace your boots and sit for a while rubbing your feet, feeling the ache of the day settle into manageable shape. The hill keep has taken you in for one night, not as guest, not as equal, not as anything storybooks would bother naming, but you are under its roof, fed by its stores, warmed by its fire, paid a fair coin for your cloth, and allowed a strip of pallet from which the yard lights look almost gentle, and that is enough. You lie back under the wool blanket and listen as the stronghold breathes through the dark gates barred. Stables muttering, embers settling, servant steps fading, torchlight wavering on stone until the stern hilltop world that all evening seemed so watchful and severe begins, at last, to feel almost like shelter. Morning on the hill arrives with frost, not the dramatic sort that transforms the world into silver legend, but a thin, stubborn whitening laid over the yard roofs, the stable fence, the cart shafts, the grass between stones, and the outer slope below the walls where the wind has been at work all night. You see it first through the shutter slit before you are fully awake, a pale brightness gathering under the grey of dawn. Then comes the cold itself, finding its way under the blanket and through the seams of the lodging, reminding you that a keep can offer shelter without ever pretending to love comfort. Around you, the other sleepers are already stirring in stages. A servant sits up and rubs his face. Someone coughs into a blanket. From outside comes the distant clatter of a pail, then the sharper ring of metal on metal from the smithy yard, where apparently mourning has been declared whether anyone agreed or not. You lie still for a few moments, listening. There is something peculiar about waking inside walls after days of road and inns and guest houses. The sounds are different, layered by rank and routine. The keep wakes from the centre outward. First the servants, then the stables, then the kitchens, then the hall. Somewhere above and beyond all that, the higher chambers, where people with fur-lined coverlets and better windows are probably still deciding whether to rise before the room is warm. You do not begrudge them this. You merely notice it with the practised philosophy of a man whose bed has recently included straw, a ladder, and a monastery pallet in swift succession. You sit up at last, pull on your boots, and wrap your cloak close before stepping out into the passage. The stone underfoot is cold enough to sharpen thought. Down in the yard, the frost is already beginning to dull where traffic crosses it. Stable boys move between doors carrying buckets and armfuls of hay, each with the grave speed of someone trying not to be noticed doing the wrong thing. Smoke pours more thickly now from the kitchen chimney. It brings with it the smell of hot grain, ashes, and something browning in fat, perhaps onions, perhaps a bit of last night's meat finding honourable second life. In the lower hall, breakfast is already being set out for the lesser household and overnight company. You take your place on a bench beneath a narrow window where the light is clear and merciless. A servant brings pottage, oat-heavy and steaming, with a crust of bread beside it. Another slaps down a little crock of salt as if granting privilege by accident. The young archer from last night appears opposite you, hair still flattened on one side from sleep. "You are off today?" he asks around the first swallow. "East again." He nods toward the shutters. "Cold walk. Better than wet. Only just. This is true. Frost has its own cruelty. Mud at least admits what it is. Frost offers beauty and then tries to break your toes with it. When you finish eating, you collect your pack and make your farewells in the modest way appropriate to passing shelter. The steward's man acknowledges you with a curt nod. The older servant from supper tells you the road down the eastern slope stays firm if you keep to the ridge track and do not trust the lower pasture lane. Looks shorter, he says, which is how it traps fools. That is also true of many things, you reply. He accepts this as worthy of the morning and tears his bread with satisfaction. Then the keep lets you go. You pass once more through the outer ward where horses stamp white breath into the air, and the storehouse doors stand open just long enough to reveal stacked sacks, hanging meat, and barrels banded in iron. Winter wealth. All of it. Not splendid, perhaps, but solid. The things that outlast cold because people counted them carefully. You have always thought merchants and stewards must secretly understand one another better than they care to admit. Both live by knowing what is on hand, what is missing and what cannot be spared. Outside the gate, the hill falls away into open country. The world is pale with morning. Frost lies over the fields in long silver sweeps. The hedges glitter faintly. The road runs ahead between low stone walls and strips of winter-brown pasture where sheep stand as motionless as dropped wool. Every breath bites a little. Your boots strike firmer ground than yesterday's mud, and for the first hour at least the walking is easier. There is a kind of peace in frost. Not warmth, certainly, and not kindness, but peace. The land seems quieter beneath it, held in pause. Sounds travel farther. A dog barks from a farm half a mile off and you hear it plainly. Ravens move over the fields like scraps of night that overslept. Somewhere a woman calls to children or geese or both. The bell of a distant church reaches you thin and clean through the air. You walk steadily, following the ridge road east and then north by its curve. Below, in the lower fields, work has already begun. You see figures moving among hayricks and store pits, small at this distance but purposeful. One yard has turnips heaped near a cellar door. Another shows beans being brought in from a dry loft. At a croft closer to the road, 2 men stack split wood against a wall, while a girl beats a rug or blanket with such conviction you suspect it has insulted her. Winter storehouses matter now. Everything put by in autumn is being guarded, portioned, repaired, smoked, salted, counted. This season is less visible than harvest, but in some ways more revealing. Summer shows abundance, winter shows management. By mid-morning the sun has risen enough to soften the frost from the road, and the land loses its silver edge. Damp returns in patches, the cold remains lodged in the shadows. Your fingers, though wrapped in your cloak as often as possible, feel stiff around the walking staff. A warm hearth begins to seem like a concept invented purely to torment travellers. Then, ahead on the road, you see a village. Not much of one. A cluster of cottages around a green gone hard with cold, a little chapel, a pond edged by reeds, smoke from 6 or 7 chimneys, and a manor barn set back behind a timber fence. Yet even such a place has its gravity. Roads gather villages the way cloaks gather burrs. There will be bread there, perhaps. News, certainly. Maybe a place to stand a while out of the wind. As you pass the first cottage, a woman is hanging strips of linen on a line despite the weather, pinning them with wooden pegs while muttering to herself, "They will dry eventually, or else simply freeze into righteous stiffness." Nearby, a child in a cap too large for him carries a bucket with both hands and stares at you as though merchants are an occasional species of bird. You nod. He nods back solemnly. Near the village green, 3 men are repairing a wattle fence where one section has given way. One of them calls out, "Road good from the keep, good enough to miss." That earns a laugh. In these places, optimism is treated like a passing fever. You pause at the chapel well to drink and rest your shoulders. The chapel door stands open, revealing a dim interior with 2 candles before the altar and a painted saint whose face has been rubbed soft by age and smoke. Tied to the latch is a little bunch of herbs, rosemary, perhaps with dried rue and a red thread wound through the stems. A charm or a blessing, or a habit so old no one remembers which it began as. Some swear herbs on a chapel door keep sickness from entering with the cold air. Others say they are for warding witches. Others claim they are simply there because the old priest's mother did it, and no one has yet dared argue with the dead. You drink, wash your hands, and move on. Beyond the village the land opens wider again, and with it comes the true labour of the day, the long walk across exposed fields. This is different from woodland walking, different from town approaches, different even from the hill track to the keep. Here there is very little to distract the mind. The road runs straight for stretches, then bends gently around boundaries and drainage ditches, then straightens again. Fields lie broad and low on either side, some already ploughed into dark ribs, some left rough with stubble, some given over to sheep, some dotted with hayricks shaped like old cloaked men crouching in thought. The horizon seems farther away than it was yesterday, the sky larger, the wind more committed. You settle into pace, step, breath, shift, step, breath, shift. This is where the journey enters your bones, not in the dramatic moments the gate tolls, the forest road, the broken cartwheel, but here, in the repeated quiet labour of crossing land that neither hinders nor helps, merely continues. Your pack pulls steadily at your shoulders. The strap rubs its familiar groove. Your heel, that old critic, complains now in a lower voice, tired perhaps of hearing itself. The road becomes not scenery but rhythm. Around noon you stop beside a low stone wall to eat the last of the bread from the keep and a little smoked meat tucked away from supper. The meat is salty enough to make you grateful for the watery ale you have left. You sit with your back against the wall and look out over the fields where crows move among the furrows like black thoughts. It is there that you notice, far off, a line of travellers on another road crossing the plain, too distant to make out clearly. Pilgrims, perhaps, or drovers, or merchants like yourself. Little moving marks in the pale world. There is comfort in that. The road can feel lonely up close, but from a hill or wall it reveals itself as a web of others, all enduring the same cold, all chasing some combination of shelter, profit, duty, penance, kin, or habit. You think, too, of the keep behind you, the rushes on the hall floor, the keys at the housekeeper's girdle, the better candles at the upper end of the table and then of the abbey before that, the scribes with ink-black fingers, the bells dividing darkness into hours. Each place leaves something with you, a smell, a phrase, a bit of advice about roads or prices or wet wood. The journey is beginning to feel stitched together from such fragments. By afternoon the clouds gather again, though lightly, in thin sheets that dim the sun without threatening rain. The world becomes all muted gold and grey. You pass a roadside shrine little larger than a birdhouse, set atop a post, with a carved saint under a peaked roof and a pilgrim badge nailed beside it. Someone has tucked a crust of bread at the base, for birds, perhaps, or spirits, or simply because leaving a thing feels better than walking away with both hands full. You bow your head as you pass. No one can quite agree whether roadside saints prefer bread, wax, ribbons, coins, or prayers spoken aloud. Some swear silence is best, because holy figures are weary of hearing the same requests. Others insist they are like reeves and must be approached formally or not at all. On a cold day in open country, you find yourself inclined to honour any system that might improve the wind. Late in the day you overtake a peasant cart drawn by one patient horse and loaded with sacks under patched cloth. The driver is an old man with a face red from weather and eyes clear as winter water. He offers you a lift with the same expression one might use to offer someone half a miracle, except that his cart is already full and you politely refuse. Roads kinder shared, he says. So are blisters. He laughs once. True enough. He tells you of a hamlet ahead where a widow lets travellers sleep near her hearth if they bring coin or news. He also advises you not to whistle crossing the little bridge before the hamlet, because the stream under it is touchy. Touchy takes offence. To whistling, to confidence. This seems a reasonable warning from any body of water in winter. You walk together a little while. He speaks of winter rye, of mould in damp grain, of keeping mice from the store loft with mint, cats, and prayer in no fixed order. Some swear a scrap of blessed parchment nailed above the granary door stops spoilage. Others say only dry wood and constant suspicion do that. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but everyone checks the grain twice. When the cart turns off toward his village lane, you continue alone again. By now the day has thinned to pearl and ash. Smoke rises straight from far chimneys. The road seems to hush itself in expectation of evening. Your steps are slower, not from failure but from accumulation, the simple weight of miles, hours, air, and thought. Yet there is no urgency in it. The long walk itself is the thing now. The merchant's life revealing its truest face not in the square or the hall, but out here under winter light, where movement becomes habit and habit becomes almost a kind of prayer. Ahead, somewhere beyond the next fold of fields, a bell rings again, not loudly, not near, just enough to reach you, and so you keep going over the frost-softened ground, through the breathing cold of the open land, carrying the day with you in slow measured steps while the fields, the walls, the smoke, and the distant bell gather quietly into evening. By the time the road brings you to the fair, the day has already begun to loosen at the edges. It is not evening yet, but afternoon has that ripe, slightly tired look it gets in colder seasons, when the light turns thin and slants low long before supper. You come over a rise expecting another village, perhaps a toll post or a wayside inn, and instead find the fields ahead suddenly crowded with colour, smoke, canvas, noise, and movement. The fair has spread itself along the roadside and into a broad meadow beside a little chapel, as if the land woke this morning and decided to become human all at once. From up here it looks almost cheerful. Closer, it looks medieval, which is to say muddy, loud, magnificent, suspicious, devout, hungry, and entirely determined to sell you something unnecessary before sunset. A line of carts stands at the edge of the meadow with horses tethered among them and geese objecting from wicker crates. Temporary stalls lean beneath patched awnings. Strips of dyed cloth flutter from poles in the wind. Smoke rises from roasting spits and little cook fires. Children run where they ought not. Dogs weave through the crowd with criminal confidence. A piper near the chapel gate is producing a tune that may be joyous or may simply be unavoidable. The whole place hums and clatters in a way that makes a tired merchant feel both alert and deeply resigned. Still, a fair is a fair, and fairs are where pilgrims, peasants, peddlers, drovers, housewives, tinkers, minor gentry, holy men, holy frauds, and ordinary opportunists all arrive at once with coin or hope or both. You would have to be a saint not to stop, and saints, in your experience, are not notably strong on trade. So you go down. The ground near the entrance has already been reduced to a dark mash by hooves and boots. A man at a trestle takes a small fee for stall space or simple entry, depending on how persuasive your face looks. You pay the lesser amount first, choosing caution over commitment. Better to see the lay of the place before offering your remaining wares to the public appetite. The fair spreads around a little stone chapel and a market cross set just beyond it. Stalls of every sort cluster in ragged order, though one senses invisible lines of privilege beneath the chaos. Food nearest the road, livestock farther off, cheap devotional things close to the chapel where conscience and commerce can share a breeze. Jugglers and musicians at the edge of the common lane where they may be enjoyed or ignored according to one's view of salvation. You walk it slowly. There are ribbons and pins, yes, and cloth poorer than yours and cloth better than yours, and leather gloves, and pewter badges, and rosaries of turned wood, and wax images of saints the size of plums. There are baskets of apples wrinkling toward cider, rounds of cheese under cloth, little spice packets sold as though they contain the East itself, knives, buckles, mirrors of polished metal, combs, dried fish, turnips, onions, charms against fever, salves for joints, powders for the teeth, and one old woman offering leeches in a covered bowl with the quiet dignity of a jeweller. No one can quite agree whether fairs are more for buying what you need or being reminded of everything you lack. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, except that no one leaves with exactly the purse they intended. You make one circuit first, as any sensible merchant would, measuring the competition. There is a cloth seller with decent wool broad enough in the shoulder to frighten haggling out of most people. A ribbon woman with 3 daughters and the collective salesmanship of a siege engine. A tinker you think you may have seen in the forest. Though without his muddy wheel trouble, he now looks almost prosperous. Good. Let him. Road misery should occasionally lead to public dignity. Near the chapel wall, pilgrims gather around a stall selling little lead badges stamped with shells, keys, staffs, swords, tiny chapels, and unfamiliar saints in awkward poses. A boy is heating wax in a small pot to seal them to thread or cloth. The badges flash dull silver in the light, and for a moment you consider whether buying one might improve your face in the eyes of innkeepers. Then you remember the last time a supposedly holy object led to extra conversation, and think better of it. Still, the fair has one thing you've not seen in days, abundance of people with coin loosened by occasion. So you find a patch near the outer row of stalls, not far from a baker selling honey cakes and uncomfortably close to a man demonstrating the sharpness of his knives by shaving curls from sticks. The space costs less than it should, which makes you suspicious. But by then you're too tired to negotiate with fate. You lay out your remaining wares carefully on a folded cloth, angling the better ribbon and the finer pins where the eye catches first. At once the fair begins testing you. A woman with 2 children and the voice of a town crier asks the price of your braid, makes a scandalized face, and buys it anyway. A boy with a pilgrim staff taller than himself finger combs one of your ribbons until you gently relocate his hand. 2 sisters in cloaks too thin for the season buy a packet of needles and ask whether you have any thread blessed against breakage. Blessed you say, or strong. Strong I can do. This is fair. Thread bears many spiritual burdens in the medieval imagination. Some swear blue thread wards off envy in a child's cap. Others insist red thread stitched into a hem turns aside cramp, fever, or wandering spirits. Even now, it is hard to tell whether people truly divide the practical from the magical, or whether they simply consider both ordinary household tools. A little after noon, the fair grows denser. Carts arrive late from outlying villages. A goat escapes and is pursued across the meadow by 3 children, 1 monk, and a woman carrying a ladle like a weapon of office. The piper changes tune, or perhaps only intensity, near the market cross. A wrestler or strongman has gathered a ring of men around him and is demonstrating his chest to people who did not ask. Smoke from roasting meat drifts through the crowd and settles over everything like a warm temptation. You sell steadily, not richly, not triumphantly, but well enough. Small things move fastest. Pins, ribbons, the last comb. A little brass clasp bought by a widow who says it is for her niece, and then smiles in a way that admits nothing. A strip of cloth goes to a farmer's wife who handles it with the same seriousness a steward gives grain. Fair buyers are not always grander than market buyers, but they are often more willing to indulge one nice thing among a season's necessities. By the chapel, the bells ring the hour, and the crowd ripples rather than stills. Some turn toward the church door, others take the moment to buy food while consciences are occupied elsewhere. Sacred time and profitable timing have long made peace. Then word begins to move through the fair like a draught under a door. A relic has arrived. At first you hear it only in fragments. A holy bone, a vial, a splinter, a saint from the south, a martyr from the east, a healing thing, a wonder, a fraud, a blessing, a portable opportunity. People begin looking toward the lane beyond the chapel where a small procession is slowly approaching a priest. 2 boys with candles sheltered in horn lanterns, and behind them a monk or friar carrying a little casket wrapped in embroidered cloth. That catches attention at once. Trade slows around you as heads turn. Even the knife demonstrator pauses long enough to resent holiness. The piper falls quiet. The crowd leans without quite meaning to. The procession reaches the market cross and stops. The priest lifts a hand. The boys stand solemnly, trying not to tilt the lanterns. The monk sets the casket down on a trestle covered in white cloth. The embroidered wrapping is folded back, and there it is, a little silver-gilt reliquary no larger than a loaf, chased with tiny figures and inset with dark stones or coloured glass. In the centre, behind a crystal or polished horn panel, something pale rests on red cloth. A finger bone, perhaps. Or not. The crowd exhales as one. You've seen this before, in grander and shabbier forms. Relics move through the world on faith, hope, rumour, and excellent timing. Some are undoubtedly real, or real enough to generations of the devout. Others are objects that have gathered belief the way old road shrines gather wax layer by layer, until no one dares scrape too close. Some swear a relic's virtue lies in its origin. Others insist it lies in the prayers offered before it. Others, more practical, suspect it lies mainly in the number of people willing to walk, kneel, or pay for the chance to touch a ribbon to its casket. The priest begins speaking. His words roll over the crowd in practiced cadences, naming the saint obscure enough to sound impressive, local enough to be useful, the miracles associated with the relic, the healing of a woman's swollen joints, a child's fever eased, a cow restored to milk, a sailor saved from storm far inland where no one can challenge the geography. Those who tell the tale never fully agree afterward on which miracle was most convincing. That is the beauty of such recitations. Each listener remembers the part most needed. The crowd shifts closer. A woman near you crosses herself repeatedly. A man removes his cap. Someone whispers that the reliquary passed through another fair 2 weeks ago and cured an ache in the shoulder simply by being looked at properly. Someone else mutters that if all relics were genuine, the saints themselves would have been walking collections of spare parts. You keep that thought to yourself. It has the flavour of accuracy, but not safety. Then comes the true sign of a fair-minded holy event offerings. A bowl is set near the trestle, not demanded perhaps, but present in a way that suggests heaven appreciates practical support. People begin to line up, some bring coins, some only kneel. A mother lifts her child toward the casket with both hands. An old man touches his cap to his chest before stepping aside. A baker you saw earlier buys a little strip of cloth that has supposedly brushed the reliquary and tucks it into his sleeve as if storing weather. Meanwhile, commerce adapts instantly. The badge seller near the chapel is suddenly doing excellent business in St. Tokens. A woman with beeswax tapers is selling offering candles at a price that strongly implies spiritual urgency. The man with the sharp knives has moved his display just far enough to avoid seeming impious, while remaining within profitable distance of anyone who may feel cured enough to celebrate with a purchase. It is one of the more honest things you will see all week. Your own stall benefits too, though sideways. The crowd bunches and drifts, carrying people past who would otherwise have missed you. A pilgrim buys 2 packets of pins and tells you solemnly that he means to touch them to the reliquary so they will protect against swelling in the fingers. A girl asks for red ribbon to tie around her mother's wrist if the saint likes us. A servant from some minor manor house buys your last decent comb in great haste because her mistress has gone to venerate the relic and she has time, at last, to make one private purchase unobserved. You cannot help it. You find the whole thing both moving and faintly comic, which is perhaps the most medieval feeling possible. Faith here is never entirely separate from mud, appetite, opportunism, and aching joints. It lives among them. When your better goods have nearly gone, you finally close the cloth over the remnants and step away for a closer look. The crowd around the relic has thickened. The priest is still speaking with admirable stamina. The monk beside the casket looks tired enough to suggest either genuine holiness or the advanced logistics of holy travel. Up close the reliquary is finely made, though one small hinge has clearly been repaired, and the cloth beneath the pale object is newer than the frame. That proves nothing, or perhaps everything. A woman beside you murmurs, "They say it is from St. Aldamar's hand." Do they? They said so in Dunfield last month too. That is interesting. You glance at her. Was it this same saint there? She pauses. No one can quite agree. You smile softly. There it is, the heart of the matter. The relic is powerful because power has gathered around it, whether by bone, box, cloth, priest, prayer, or the long human habit of wanting the world to hold a few trustworthy mysteries. Some will leave healed, some will leave doubtful, most will leave with a story, and stories travel farther than bones ever do. By late afternoon the line thins, the fair exhales. People return to buying sausages, ribbons, oatcakes, and knives as if holiness has simply taken its turn among the stalls and now moved politely aside. The piper starts up again. Children resume running. Someone nearby begins recounting the relic's arrival already, improving details with each breath. You sell the last of your cheap laces to a man who claims they are for mending a satchel and not at all for his daughter's sleeves. Then, with the light beginning to slope and the fair preparing for evening, you pack what little remains. Not much now. A few odds and ends. Enough to justify keeping them. Little enough to make your pack feel blessedly lighter. As you tie the bundle, the chapel bell rings once more across the meadow. The relic glints in the fading light. The crowd has thinned to clusters. Smoke drifts low over the fair, and for a moment the whole scene seems suspended between devotion and trade, wonder and weariness, piety and pastry. Then the spell breaks the way all such spells do not with disaster, but with supper. Voices rise again. Fires are fed. Carts creak. Somewhere a child begins to cry from tiredness rather than grief. Evening moves in, and you, with lighter wares and a head full of saintly uncertainty, turn from the fair toward the road once more, carrying with you the smell of wax, roast meat, trampled grass, and the curious little thrill that comes from standing all afternoon beside a miracle no one can fully explain and everyone seems ready to profit from. You leave the fair with evening at your heels. The meadow behind you is still alive with noise, but it is changing from market sound to night sound, and the difference matters. Bargaining voices soften into supper voices. The piper has given up or been outvoted. Smoke from cook fires lies low over the trampled grass in blue-grey sheets, and lanterns begin to appear one by one among the carts like cautious stars. For a brief moment you consider finding a shed, a bench, a patch of straw behind someone's wagon, but fares grow unruly in the dark unless you're selling, drinking, or related to the organisers, and you're not currently any of those things. So you take the road. It runs northward from the chapel lane, narrower now, with ruts deepened by the traffic of the fair and the season. The sky above is clearing toward a hard, cold night. A pale wash of gold still lingers low in the west, caught beneath long bars of cloud. But overhead the blue has already deepened toward iron. The air smells of wood smoke, damp earth, and distant frost. Your pack sits easier on your shoulders now that so many small wares have gone from it. That, more than the coin, feels like grace. You walk at a slower pace than usual. The day has been too full of people, bells, voices, goods, rumours, saints, and roasted meat to permit any sudden speed. Your mind is still carrying the fair inside it, the glint of the reliquary, the wax offerings, the woman who could not remember which saint she had seen last month, the red ribbon bought for mending, the knife seller hovering just outside holiness with exemplary business instinct. The road after such a place feels strangely empty at first, like a church after candles are pinched out. But it does not stay empty for long. Not a mile from the fair, the road begins to gather travellers who've made the same choice you have, those too poor to pay for a bed near the stalls, too late for the village inns, too experienced to be surprised by either fact. You see them ahead in twos and threes, dark shapes against the fading field edges, a pilgrim with a staff, a drover leading a small pack mule, two women carrying bundles tied in cloth, a boy in a short cloak walking beside an older man whose shoulders slope with the weariness of many winters. All of you are moving in the same direction, not together exactly, but with the quiet recognition of people who know the same problem is approaching. Night, and with it the need for fire, bread, and a little company, even if none of you would call it that. The road bends toward a stand of willows near a shallow stream, then opens into a patch of rough common ground beside the pilgrim way. You see the place before anyone says it aloud. The earth there has been used before blackened circles from old fires, flattened grass, a few stones dragged into rings, bits of ash, a broken peg, a chicken feather caught under a root. This is where road people stop when stopping can no longer be delayed. One man reaches it first and lifts his hand. No speech, just the gesture. Here, that is enough. You step off the road and set down your pack with the slow care of a body coming to the end of its day. Around you the others do the same. No one claims ownership. No one asks permission. The place belongs to need and previous use, which is close enough to law out here. There are 8 of you by the time the camp is properly decided. The pilgrim with the staff, a thin fellow with a shell badge and a cough that sounds older than he is. The drover with the mule, whose hood is patched in 3 colours and whose boots might once have belonged to a larger optimist. 2 women travelling together, one broad-faced and quiet, the other small and sharp-eyed with a bundle tied across her back. The older man and the boy, who turn out to be uncle and nephew bound toward kin farther north, a peddler with a leather satchel and a red scarf at his throat, and you. No one can quite agree whether shared camps are safer because strangers keep watch together, or more dangerous because strangers are strangers. Even now, it is hard to tell. Yet the road makes practical philosophers of everyone. A lone sleeper freezes faster, loses more easily, and has no one to notice if trouble comes wearing boots or teeth. So you settle near one another with the politeness of mutual calculation. Wood must be found first. That sends 3 of you to the willows and the hedge beyond, gathering fallen branches, old twigs, half-dry sticks, anything that will burn without producing more smoke than warmth. The drover contributes a twist of straw from his mule's forage. The small, sharp-eyed woman produces tinder from a pouch with the triumph of a magician revealing his final trick. You offer a shaving of beeswax scraped from an old candle stub you had nearly forgotten at the bottom of your pack. Within a short while, after much crouching and patient blowing and one brief period when the whole enterprise seems dedicated to smoke rather than flame, the fire catches. That changes everything. Not magnificently. It is a small fire, and the night is a large one. But its light draws the circle of the camp into being. Faces appear, hands extend toward the heat. Cloaks steam faintly where the damp still lingers in the folds. The mule lowers its head and stands as though fire is beneath its dignity. Above you the first stars sharpen in the clear dark. Bread comes next. As always, once the fire exists, people begin discovering food they had not quite admitted to having. The older man unwraps coarse bread and a lump of white cheese. The broad-faced woman has onions and a little bag of dried peas, though the peas are judged too ambitious for tonight. The peddler shares smoked fish so dry it cracks at the edge. You contribute the end of a loaf from the fair and the last heel of hard cheese from the keep, now so firm it could nearly serve as a counting piece. The pilgrim with the shell badge has nothing much beyond a flask and 2 apples softening toward honesty, but he offers one anyway, and that is accepted with the gravity proper to camp generosity. You sit on your cloak with the fire warming one side of you and the other side already beginning to negotiate with the cold. There is a particular kind of eating that happens only by roadside fires. No plates, no ceremony, bread broken by hand, passed along, dipped into ale if one is fortunate, held to the heat if one is not, onion peeled with a knife and shared in rings, smoked fish torn apart and handed around. Everything tastes of smoke, effort, and the relief of not walking. The boy, no more than 13 perhaps, eats too quickly until his uncle tells him he will wake hungrier if he swallows like a dog stealing from a priest. The peddler laughs softly. Dogs choose better priests. That earns the first real amusement of the evening, not loud laughter. No one has strength for that, but the kind that travels warm around the circle and settles into the firelight. Names come slowly, if at all. Road camps are not confessionals in the formal sense, yet as the dark thickens beyond the little ring of flame, speech loosens, not into boasting that is for inns and market ale, but into quieter things, where one is bound. How far? What road was worst? Which bridge taxed too much? Which village had decent bread? Which shrine cured nothing at all? Practical intimacies. The broad-faced woman says they are sisters, though after a moment the small one corrects her. Cousins. Close enough, says the other. They are carrying thread and woven bands to kin in a town 2 days on. The older man and his nephew are hoping for work mending hedges and ditching before winter closes the ground too hard. The drover is taking the mule and 2 packs of hides toward a tannery near the river. The peddler sells buckles, hooks, and other useful failures of metal, which you admire as a phrase. At last the pilgrim speaks. He has been quiet, hands spread toward the fire, the shell badge at his chest catching orange light. I was told, he says, that the shrine at Red Fen helps a cough if you sleep one night beside the altar rail. The uncle glances at him, and does it. The pilgrim shrugs, then coughs into his sleeve. I have not slept there yet. No one laughs at that. The night is too cold, the man too thin, the hope too plainly held. Some swear shrine railings hold healing in the worn places where generations of hands have rested. Others say the cure comes from the pilgrim's faith, or the long walking, or the simple fact that after enough miles any man will swear improvement rather than turn back disappointed. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Still, the pilgrim speaks of red fen the way merchants speak of good market squares and farmers of dry grain lofts, not with certainty, but with need. The small sharp-eyed cousin reaches into her pouch and pulls out a little twist of herbs bound in cloth. For the chest, she says. Thyme and horehound. My mother swore by it. The pilgrim hesitates, then takes it carefully, as one receives both medicine and courtesy at once. Thank you. She also swore by eels for rheumatism, says the broad-faced woman. So judge wisely. This gets another soft ripple around the fire. You find yourself rubbing your heel through the leather of your boot, not from urgency now, but from habit. The peddler notices blister complaint in that region. He digs into his satchel and produces a strip of soft cloth already greased with something dark. Comfrey and goose fat, he says. Or mostly goose fat with a hopeful leaf waved over it. Good for rubbing. You accept it with thanks. The road has a way of making men exchange remedies they would mock in daylight drawing rooms. Out here, anything that has helped even one person even once becomes a candidate for reverence. The boy, watching all this, reaches under his own tunic and pulls free a little charm on a cord, a tiny iron key. My mother tied it there, he says, for sleep. The uncle grunts, and to stop you wondering, the boy frowns. She said it keeps bad dreams from opening. No one corrects him. In the firelight the key glints black and orange, small and earnest against the cloth. The drover, after a moment, taps a sewn packet at his sleeve. Ash bark, rowan berry, St. Jude scrap, and a rabbit hair. That is not a charm, says the peddler. That is an entire border garrison. The drover actually laughs, brief and surprised. Hasn't failed yet. No chance for bad luck to find a place to stand, you say. Around the fire the little private defences emerge one by one as naturally as food had. A ribbon tied at the wrist against fever, a pewter badge sewn into a hem, a bent coin carried in the shoe for luck on bridges, a sprig of rosemary tucked into the broad-faced woman's bundle for air that smells wrong. Everyone, it seems, carries some small treaty with uncertainty. Above you the stars have fully claimed the sky now. The fair's distant glow is barely a smudge to the south. The fields around the common lie dark and open, their boundaries gone except where a hedge catches a little firelight at the edge. The stream nearby moves with a steady cold whisper. Somewhere out in the dark a dog barks twice, then thinks better of it. The camp quiets. Not suddenly, but by degrees. Speech thins. Shoulders lower. The bread is gone. The smoked fish has lost its mystery. One of the cousins pulls her cloak over her knees and leans closer to the heat. The uncle wraps a blanket around the boy without comment. The pilgrim holds the herb packet in his palm as though warming it into usefulness. And because the dark invites it, the quieter truths come. Not confessions exactly. No one here is trying to become noble by sorrow, but little admissions. The drover says he hates bridges more than forests, because at least forests do not pretend to hold you. The peddler says he once had a wife who could sell broken buckles better than he can sell new ones, and now every market square feels a little too wide. The broad-faced cousin says she dreads arriving at kin because kin count what you bring, and what you failed to bring with equal accuracy. The uncle says nothing for a long time, then only, "Winter feels longer each year." That one lands softly among you like ash. No answer is needed. You tell them, because the fire and the miles seem to ask it, about the suspicious monk at the alehouse, and the relic at the fair, and the broken cartwheel near the frosted stream. The story of the wheel pleases the boy most. The story of the relic pleases the peddler, who says, "A saint may be many things, but never useless if properly scheduled." The pilgrim gives him a look of mild horror, then, to everyone's surprise, smiles. The fire burns lower. One by one you make yourselves into sleeping shapes, cloaks doubled, packs under heads, boots tucked close, staffs within reach. The mule is looped to a willow root. The peddler adds one last stick. Sparks rise and vanish. Beyond the red core of the fire, the night waits in patient blackness, vast and uninterested. You rub the comfrey grease into your heel, wrap the cloth over it, and settle onto your side. The ground is hard, but after the day it feels earned. Nearby someone murmurs a short prayer. Someone else mutters what may be a weather charm or merely a complaint about cold toes. The stream goes on whispering, before sleep takes you. You look once more at the little circle you have all made together out of scraps, aches, herbs, bread, fire, and road-worn kindness. Tomorrow you will separate. That is the rule. Camps form and dissolve. Names are forgotten. Advice lingers. A cough, a charm, a joke about priests, the smell of smoked fish, the sight of a tiny iron key against a boy's tunic. These are what remain. Then the last of the fire folds into embers. The stars lean cold and clear above the pilgrim way, and you drift at last into sleep among strangers who, for one small night beneath the open dark, feel almost like companions. You wake before the fire is fully dead. For a moment you do not open your eyes. You lie still under your cloak, feeling the ground beneath you, the cold in the air above you, and the last weak warmth of embers somewhere near your boots. Around you, the camp is only beginning to remember itself. A cough from the pilgrim, the soft stamp of the mule, cloth rustling as one of the cousins turns over and pulls her hood closer. The stream beside the common still speaks in its quiet, endless whisper, as if it has spent the whole night practicing patience and found the performance convincing. When you do open your eyes, the sky is a deep pre-dawn grey with one hard star still hanging low to the west. The fire has sunk to a red heart under ash. Breath rises from each sleeping figure in faint pale bursts. Someone, perhaps the uncle, perhaps the drover, has fed the embers once in the night, because the coals are banked neatly rather than abandoned. That feels like the most trustworthy kind of kindness, the sort done half asleep and not mentioned later. You sit up slowly, every joint reporting in. The comfrey and goose-fat cloth at your heel has helped, or at least the goose-fat has bullied the skin into temporary cooperation. Your shoulders still ache. Your neck has opinions, but the road has taught you the value of distinguishing between pain that ends a journey and pain that simply accompanies one. This morning, you're still in the second category, and that is enough. One by one, the others wake. No grand greeting passes among you. Dawn camps are quieter than night ones. Speech belongs more to firelight. Morning belongs to bread and movement. The drover crouches and stirs the embers back to life. The broad-faced cousin unwraps the last crust from a cloth. The boy emerges from his blanket with hair flattened in heroic directions and goes at once to check the little iron key under his tunic, as though bad dreams might have stolen it in the dark. Finding it still there, he nods to himself. The pilgrim coughs into his sleeve, then sits for a long while looking toward the paling east. No one can quite agree whether dawn on the road feels hopeful or merely unavoidable. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, perhaps because it is usually both. You warm your hands over the kindled fire while the sky lightens by slow degrees. There is no breakfast worth naming, only remnants divided honestly a little bread, a piece of smoked fish, the softening apple saved from last night, a swallow or two of thin ale passed from flask to flask with the courtesy of people who know exactly how little it is. The small sharp-eyed cousin ties her bundle with brisk fingers. The peddler checks his satchel clasps one by one. The uncle adjusts the blanket on the boy's shoulders and then immediately tells him not to walk like a martyr. This seems, from the boy's expression, to be a regular form of affection. Soon enough the camp begins to dissolve. That is always the strange part. In the dark, the circle feels temporary but real. By dawn, reality resumes its separate errands. The drover is for the river tannery, the cousins for kin in the north town, the pilgrim for Red Fen and his hopeful shrine rail, the uncle and boy for hedgework and whatever winter labour answers quickest, the peddler for anywhere buckles fail with sufficient frequency, and you, though the road bends familiar now, find your steps turning homeward. Not sharply, not with dramatic decision, more with the slow inward pull that follows a good fare, a lightened pack, and enough days of road to satisfy both purse and pride. The way ahead leads through country you have not entirely forgotten. A chapel bell heard once before, a bridge with the same crooked rail, a town whose gate smells faintly of onions and horses. The thought settles quietly inside you. You are turning back. When you stand and shoulder your pack, it feels different than it did at the river town days ago. Lighter in goods, yes, but heavier somehow with weather, smells, voices, and places. The half-burned candle in the alehouse, the suspicious monk and his secret bone, the wet timbers at the manor crossing, the monastery bells through fog, the old ash in the forest with ribbons at its roots, the market square on cold stone, the wheel lashed with rawhide by the frosted stream, the housekeeper's ring of keys in the hill keep, the relic glittering on red cloth while pastry sellers prospered nearby, and this little fire on common ground, shared with strangers and one very unimpressed mule. You part from them with nods, brief words, and the sort of compact road blessings that mean more than they sound. Good road, dry feet, keep the weather behind you. May the saint at Red Fen be awake. That last one is for the pilgrim, who smiles despite the cough. Then you walk. Morning comes fully as you leave the common and rejoin the pilgrim way. Frost rims the grass again in white threads, thinner than yesterday's but enough to make the verge gleam. The sky clears into a pale washed blue. Smoke rises from unseen cottages. Somewhere in the distance a bell rings, and because you're turning back now, the sound does not feel like invitation so much as recognition. The road northward and then westward passes through open country first, over low ridges where the land lies bare and quiet under the season's thin light. Your pace is steady, unhurried. There's no market to reach before noon, no Lord's Gate to arrive at before dark, no fair to catch at its busiest hour. This changes the walking. It softens something in it. The road remains long, but it is no longer all edge and ambition. Familiarity has begun to lace itself through the miles. Before midday you come to a small bridge over a stream narrow enough to leap in summer and troublesome enough in winter to deserve a saint. The rail is crooked just as the old man from yesterday's road camp might have appreciated. You remember his warning about touchy water and, on impulse, do not whistle crossing it. There is no reason to mock a stream unnecessarily. The water slips dark beneath the boards, moss shines at the edges. A little rag tied to the downstream post flutters in the breeze, an offering, perhaps, or merely proof that every bridge collects private negotiations. On the far side stands a wayside cross with a niche in its base. Inside, someone has left rosemary and a lump of beeswax pressed with a thumbprint. Some swear beeswax left at crossings keeps travellers from circling back in confusion. Others say it helps the dead keep to their own roads. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the living make such offerings out of fear, habit, or the simple wish to leave a small polite sign behind them. You walk on. By noon the road brings you past the first of the places that now feel known. A little orchard beyond a chapel wall, a ditch where geese once hissed at you with more conviction than talent, a lane turning toward farm buildings with smoked eels hanging under a lean-to roof. Seen the second time, these things become part of your own memory rather than the world's general clutter. You find yourself looking for them before they appear, and when they do, the heart eases fractionally as though greeting old, unimpressive friends. This is the hidden comfort of return, not grandeur, recognition. You stop at a village green to eat a crust and a little onion bought that morning from a cottage woman, whose only question had been whether you carried exact change and decent sense. Around the green, winter life goes on with its plain, relentless business. A man patches a hurdle. 2 girls shake rugs from an upper window. A woman turns strips of bacon hanging near a fire shed. A dog sleeps in a patch of pale sunlight with the authority of a magistrate. The chapel bell marks the hour, and the sound enters the day like a thread being drawn through cloth. On the bench beside you sits an old woman wrapping a child's wrists in strips of red wool. "For the cold," she says when she notices your glance. Does it help? It reminds the body to stay in. That is as good an explanation as any you have heard. The child studies your pack. Are you a pilgrim merchant? He seems disappointed. The old woman is not better, she says. Pilgrims mostly carry stories. Merchants carry needles. This is the kind of praise one remembers. You leave the village with a faint smile and follow the west road as it begins, little by little, to echo earlier days, a stand of willow, a shrine post, a hill crest from which the land folds toward a distant town wall. None of it is dramatic. Yet because you have already passed here once before, the world seems less broad and less indifferent. You know now where the mud gathers, where the hedges narrow, where the smell of tanneries arrives too early, where the road dips into shadow before opening out again. Knowledge of this sort is humble, but it comforts. By mid-afternoon clouds gather lightly, and the air dims. Not rain, only a muffling of brightness. Good walking weather, if no one asks your feet. Your thoughts move lazily with your steps. You think of the housekeeper in the keep folding your blue cloth into household order, of the abbey porter and his heavy keys, of the boy at the campfire checking his little iron charm at dawn, of the relic at the fair, already by now transformed into 3 different versions in 3 different alehouses. Some will swear it healed a woman's joints before their eyes. Some will say the saint's finger looked suspiciously like chicken bone. Some will claim the miracle was only that the pastry seller never ran out. You suspect all 3 stories will prosper. Late in the day, when the light begins to tilt gold through the cloud, you hear bells again. Not abbey bells this time. Lighter, quicker, familiar in another way. Town bells. The sound comes from ahead, over a rise and beyond a line of bare trees. You know them before you see the place itself, the same gate town where the toll man weighed your answers like grain, and your purse like a sin. You're not there yet, but the bells tell you enough. Return has a sound, and this is part of it. You crest the rise slowly and look out. There it lies in the distance, grey walls, clustered roofs, smoke lifting above them in the late cold. Not beautiful, not welcoming, not changed much, probably, since you passed through before. Yet now the sight of it lands differently. You're not approaching as an unknown road ahead. You're approaching as something on the way back to something else. The day softens around that thought. A little farther on you overtake a cart loaded with wool bales under tarred cloth. The driver, bundled up to the eyebrows, glances down at you. Town by dark, if you keep at it. I know. He studies you for a moment. Been through before. Yes. He nods, satisfied. Second time's kinder. You're not sure that is true, but it is close enough. As evening settles, the road darkens at the edges and the bells continue faintly through the cooling air. Your steps are slower now, not from uncertainty, but from that quiet end-of-day heaviness that belongs equally to workers, monks, drovers, and merchants. Smoke from the town reaches you before the gate does. Wood, peat, damp wool, and cooking broth. Human smell. Lived smell. Home-adjacent smell, even if not home itself. And that is what this day has become. Not arrival yet, not rest, but the beginning of return under winter bells, where the same mud, the same shrines, the same gates, and the same smoke no longer seem like obstacles scattered across the world, but familiar marks along a road that is slowly, steadily, bringing you back. By the time you reach the river town again, it is fully evening. Not deep night yet, but that hour when the last useful light has gone out of the sky and survives only in windows, cook fires, and the polished shoulders of people still moving through the streets because life, maddeningly, continues after dark. The bell you heard on the road follows you inward as you cross the outskirts. First past low cottages with smoke pressed flat under the cooling air, then along muddy lanes where puddles hold pieces of torchlight, and finally toward the narrow bridge over the river where your journey first began. You stop there for a moment before crossing. The water moves black beneath the planks, carrying with it little ribbons of reflected gold from the lamps on the near bank. Mist is rising again, as it did that first morning, soft and white and patient over the current. The town beyond looks almost unchanged, crooked roofs, shuttered windows, a church tower keeping its own counsel in the dark, the faint glow of alehouse signs and horn-paned windows, yet you are not unchanged. And so the whole place feels different simply because you have come back to it bearing days within you. Your pack is lighter now. That is the first truth of return. The strap still rubs the same place on your shoulder, but it presses less heavily. The remaining wares inside no longer fill every corner. In their place there is coin, yes, though not enough to transform your fortunes into poetry. But there is also the stranger weight of memory, the kind that does not strain the back, but settles quietly elsewhere. The wet timbers at the manor crossing, the monastery bells through fog, the old ash in the forest, the cold stone of the market square, the rawhide cinched around a split wheel, the stern hall of the hill keep, the glitter of a relic, the little iron key hanging from a boy's neck beside the fire. You cross the bridge. The wood creaks under your boots just as it did when you first set out, and somehow that small familiar complaint feels almost welcoming. On the far side, the streets tighten around you. A dog lifts its head from beneath a cart and decides you're not worth the effort. A woman empties wash water into the gutter with a splash and a muttered warning to no one in particular. From one doorway comes the smell of leeks and broth. From another, hot pitch and wet rope. The river town is not beautiful. Not in the polished way songs pretend places can be. It is better than that. It is used. You know now where the mud deepens at the turn by the cooper's yard. You know which lane drifts smoky near the baker's oven, and which one catches a knife-edge wind from the river. You know the bell's tone here, duller and more domestic than the abbey's. You know, too, how the whole town smells after rain and commerce-wet wood. Ash, horse breath, cabbage, ale, damp straw, and human persistence. This is enough to make a place feel nearly intimate. You find lodging where you half expected to at a house near the river lane, whose widow lets a corner pallet for a decent coin and a quiet tongue. She remembers you only in the general way innkeepers remember types rather than faces merchant. Road-worn, manageable. That is entirely fine. Recognition is not always required. Sometimes being correctly sorted counts as hospitality. Her main room is low-ceilinged and warm, with soot-black rafters and a hearth where a pot hangs over a bed of red coals. Rushes cover the floor, fresher than some and older than others. 2 beeswax candles burn on a shelf near a painted scent tucked into the corner, their faint honey scent gentler than the kitchen smoke. An old cat sleeps in a basket as though rent is beneath it. You're given a bowl of pottage thick with barley and cabbage, a heel of coarse bread, and a place on the bench near the fire while the pallet is prepared. It is astonishing how little splendour the body requires in order to call a place blessed. You eat slowly. No need to bolt the food now, no need to keep one ear on the road or one eye on a fair crowd. The bowl warms your hands. The pottage settles into you with the calm finality of an evening well past argument. Around you the house breathes in its own small domestic rhythm. The widow folds cloth near the hearth. A child in the back room is hushed, then quiet. The cat twitches once in sleep. Outside, wheels pass now and then over wet ground, and once the bell rings again, low and familiar. You find yourself thinking not only of what you sold, but of what you have brought back without meaning to. A merchant begins with cloth, pins, ribbons, buckles, combs. But somewhere along the road he begins gathering other cargo, advice about a bad stretch of mud from a rider who barely slowed, the housekeeper's expression when she approved the blue cloth, the abbey porter saying not to trust confidence in mist, the campfire joke about dogs and priests, the village woman who said pilgrims carry stories and merchants carry needles, 100 small human things, all folded away like goods into corners of the mind. No one can quite agree whether the road changes a person or merely scrapes him down until the same person shows more plainly. Even now, it is hard to tell. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps walking long enough through cold and smoke and bells and other people's needs makes the soul simpler in the way wool becomes simpler once the burrs are picked from it. When the widow shows you the pallet, it is tucked beneath the eaves in a side chamber no larger than a storeroom with ambitions. There is a wool blanket, an extra folded cloak at the foot, and a little shutter cracked open just enough to let in a sliver of river mist and night air. On a peg nearby hangs a bunch of rosemary and rue tied with blue thread. For dreams, the widow says when she sees you notice it. Does it work? She shrugs. No one's complained while sleeping. That seems as solid a recommendation as any on the road. You thank her, unlace your boots, and sit on the edge of the pallet for a long moment, rubbing your feet as the familiar complaints rise and settle. Your heel is no longer angry, merely proud of its endurance. Your shoulders ache in the deep, companionable way of burdens nearly set down. You lay your pack beside you and untie it for the first time since arriving, not to sell, not to arrange, not to guard, simply to unpack. That act feels more ceremonial than you expect. Out come the few wares unsold, a packet of plain lace, a comb not chosen, 2 small brass hooks, A strip of cloth too narrow for most tastes. Then the things not meant for trade, the waxed cord from the woman at the broken cart, the little scrap of candle stub from the guest house, a pilgrim badge bought at the fair after all, not because you needed it, but because the road had taught you to enjoy a private foolishness. The strip of comfrey cloth, now empty of usefulness but oddly hard to discard. These are the true remains of travel, not loot, not trophies, just fragments. You set them aside and lie back at last under the blanket. The house is quieting now, fire settling, a cup moved softly, the cat deciding to relocate with tremendous significance. Somewhere beyond the shutter the river goes on in the dark, unconcerned by merchants, monks, tolls, relics, and all the other brief matters that so fully occupy the human day. You close your eyes. And because this is the end of a long road, the mind does what it always does when finally given stillness, it walks backward. Not in order. Memory never honours roads properly. Instead, it offers what it wants. The glow of the fair against evening grass, the abbey yard silvered with mist, the market clerk's ink-stained fingers, the smell of smoked eels under a farm lean-to, the hard look of frost on the hill-keep's yard, a ribbon fading almost white on the forest shrine, the little campfire on the common, a stream that disliked confidence, a bell carried thin over winter fields. All of it softens now, losing edge, becoming less event than atmosphere. The long walks are ending. You're no longer forcing one more mile before dark, no longer gauging a gate fee against a thinner purse, no longer choosing between wet shelter and no shelter, no longer listening for wheels, hooves, bells, bargains, weather. The merchant's road, which has for so many days been the whole shape of life, begins at last to recede into something held rather than endured. And so the world grows gentler. The river mist outside thickens and quiets the night. The bell does not ring again. The house settles around you like folded wool, somewhere under the rosemary and the old blue thread. The dark itself seems to lower into warmth. The roads behind you blur into pale tracks under moonlight, then into memory, then into nothing you need to carry any farther tonight. You breathe. Slowly now. The straw under the pallet gives a little beneath your weight. The blanket holds its warmth close. The smell of smoke in the rafters becomes faint and sweet. Your boots wait by the wall, empty and patient. Your pack rests beside them, untied at last, its straps slack, its labour done for now, and in that quiet, with no one asking a price, no road demanding your feet, no bell summoning you onward, the medieval world that has held you so long in motion begins to fade into stillness. The bridge is crossed, the gate is shut, the fire is banked, the pack is laid down. Outside, the river moves softly through the dark, carrying mist past the sleeping town, past the bridge, past the muddy roads that tomorrow will still be there, and still be long, and still be full of shrines, tolls, inns, fields, and weather. But not tonight. Tonight there is only this small room, this dim peace, this wool blanket, this fading warmth, this body finally allowed to rest, and the slow quiet certainty that you have come back from the long walks with enough coin, enough memory, and enough weariness to deserve sleep. So you let the town grow still around you. You let the bells fall silent. You let the road unfasten itself from your thoughts. You let the last embers of the journey dim and soften and settle, until all that remains is warmth near your hands, darkness at the window, and the old kind, drifting hush that comes when at last there is nowhere left to go.